Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Planning Committee on Tuesday, the 5th of September. Welcome particularly to members and to people in the public gallery, I should say, and to members of the press. It's obviously quite a warm day, so try to make yourselves as comfortable as possible. Feel free to remove jackets and such. I'm not going to propose to introduce councillors, as that will become clear, I think, as we take questions as we progress. But officers, we have Mr. Russell Chick, who's the Planning Development Manager, Mr. Oliver Bolter, Strategic Manager for Planning and Infrastructure, Mr. Stuart Van Kullenberg, who is the Principal Planning Officer, Mr. Neil Troughton, who is the Highways Representative, Ben Gard, our Legal Advisor, Mary Bartlett, our committee clerk, and Mr. Councillor Paul Fuller, who's the Cabinet Member for Planning and Enforcement. Some very brief housekeeping notices. There are no planned fire drills during this meeting, so if you hear the fire alarm sound, please treat it as the real emergency and evacuate via the nearest safe escape route, which is via the signposted set of stairs to your left as you leave the council chamber. Exit via the door at the back of the building, walk across the inner car park to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. Lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency, and please do not re-enter the building until advised that it's safe to do so by a council member of staff. If everyone could please check that their mobile phones are switched off or to mute. And if you are speaking, please use the microphones to do so. Members will be aware, no doubt, that they cannot leave the chamber during the presentation or the debate. If they do leave, they'll be unable to vote on that application. And members of the public to purely observe the process. Thank you. So the lighting system, when you're asked to speak, the green light will display. When you'll have a few seconds left, the amber light will flash. And then when the red light displays, I will politely stop you from speaking. And this is to ensure that all parties receive a fair hearing and an equal amount of time. So we move, therefore, to the agenda. Firstly, then, apologies and changes in membership. I've received apologies from Councillor Peter Spink. I don't believe there are any others. Splendid. So then to our previous meeting minutes. Does anyone have any comments or addendums they'd like to make on those? In which case, if I could have a proposer and seconder. Thank you, Councillor Brodie and Martin, thank you. All in favour? And against? No abstentions, thank you. Right, let me sign this. So we move then to public question time. This is 15 minutes. Questions are restricted to matters which are not on the agenda. Are there any public questions? No? Okay, thank you. In which case we move to, excuse me. So I beg your pardon, we move now to declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Quirk.
The first item on the agenda has previously been to this committee, so many of us would have considered it previously and actually come to a determination on it. For those of us who were here previously, the issue will be whether something has changed. So it's the difference in the report, i.e. the issues about nitrates. I have an opinion on everything else, and this is the bit that I'm sort of open to nitrates. So I'm not predetermined anymore in terms of anything apart from that which I've already determined. And I think that applies to quite a few of us. And I don't know if Ben wants to just give some clarification there.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Yes, Mr. Gard, if you could speak to that point, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the matters has been before the committee. It's back before you twice, I'm told, before this committee. It's back before you again with a new material planning consideration. And it's for this committee to have regard to all of the material planning considerations. And for many of you, that may just simply be a case of picking up where you left off and adding the new material to your previous position. There is no predetermination in respect of that. Simply that being the case, in fact, you have to have regard to all material planning considerations, and that's why it is back before you again. So for many, it would just be a case of picking up where you left off, perhaps, and just adding this new consideration and coming to a conclusion. It remains open to you to add that new material planning consideration to the pot and come up with a different position. But I'll leave that to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Guard. Does that answer your concern, councillor? Yep. Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. In which case we will move to agenda item 4, which is our planning report, commencing with application reference 21/00684/FUL. This is land at Lee Farm, Wellow, and it is going to be presented by Mr. Russell Chick. Mr. Chick, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good afternoon, councillors. So as described earlier on, this application has been back to committee once before, having been resolved for approval before that. It is in front of committee tonight because of changes to nitrates calculations issued by Natural England. But for the sake of completeness, I'm going to go through the presentation that we've had before and just show you what the proposals are, and then explain any differences in questioning. So the application site is located in Thorley at the point of the red cursor at the moment, and a slightly zoomed in version of that plan just showing the layout of existing buildings on the site. Councillors, you can see the existing houses in Thorley, which the site is immediately next to, and then in Wellow, which is about 300 metres away. Just showing it in aerial format. Again, in the red circle there, you can see the outline of the existing buildings on the site. There is a mix of modern barns, older barns, and listed buildings, which the photos in a moment will show. You'll note Thorley Road just down to the south there. The application site's about 300 metres from that road. And then the plan on the right-hand side shows the outline of the application site in red, including the existing access road. And what it also shows is a green line, which I'll show with the cursor because it's not completely clear, which runs through here, which is about a 1.75 kilometre section of cycle track, which the development would fund. In terms of designations then, the application site isn't the subject of any designations. It's brownfield land because it hasn't been used for agriculture. It's been used for a mix of other uses confirmed by historic planning permissions. There are listed buildings on the site. Lee Farmhouse, which is quite a large, impressive Georgian farmhouse, is at the point of the cursor here. And obviously I have photos of that in a moment. There's quite a fine example of an old stable block, which is related to Lee Farm on the site as well. And then the other orange dots on this plan just denote other listed buildings within Wellow and Thorley. So these photos show the application site from Broad Lane between Wellow and Thorley, which is the yellow road here. That's the road that joins the middle road to Thorley Street. And these are showing the site at about between 700 and 400 metres. And it is the point of the cursor here, hidden behind a belt of trees. And in the foreground, you can see the existing buildings in Thorley itself. And then this photo is just showing the application site, which is located in a slight depression in the landscape following the course of Thorley Brook. And you can see it is shown from the line of the former railway track, which some councillors will recall from the site visit that we carried out a couple of years ago. And the second photograph is taken from a farm track that connects to that old railway track, just showing how the application site sits well below the horizon in the landscape in this area when looking from the north. And then some views taken from the east of the site at around 700 to 300 metres. The first one here on the right-hand bottom side is looking at the point of this arrow here, which is a public right-of-way that joins onto Wellow. And then the second is taken from the meadows just off to the east of the application site, where you can start to see the existing buildings at the application site hedgerows in front of them. And then the last photograph is the application site itself, looking back to the north, and that shows a large belt of large oak trees in that location, which do screen the site. And then some photographs taken from Thorley. Photographs here are taken from Thorley Road, so looking up the access track towards the application site, which is screened by a belt of trees in the foreground. And then another photograph taken actually on Thorley Street here, where the cursor is, and you can just see the listed farmhouse here, and then looking at the older barns and the newer barns just behind that hedge line, which follows the course of Thorley Brook. So these photographs mainly show the site access. So this photograph at the top on the left-hand side is showing the access then looking down towards Thorley Road, Thorley Street. And you can see just on the right-hand side there, the listed farmhouse. And then the remainder of the photos are showing the existing site access, which would be used for the proposed development. And then looking down to the west, just to show where the bus stops are in this location. Handley Southern Vectors turned up at just the right time. You can see the bus coming along to the bus stop here. And there's another bus stop on the other side, which is proposed to be moved through this development. Then looking at the application site itself, this is Lee Farmhouse on the bottom left-hand side. It's a Grade 2 listed building. There's a line of older barns which are converted to a dwelling, which is just off to the north of this little Staddlestone building here. And then this building in the top right-hand side is the listed stable block, hidden behind a range of modern buildings on the other side of the site. And those modern buildings are shown here. So Lee Farmhouse and all those historic buildings are on the other side of these buildings, which would be retained. And then if I turn my back at this photograph, we would then look this way on the bottom slides, which show the buildings which would be demolished and where the proposed development would take place. And then just some more photographs showing the application site, showing those buildings a bit closer up, various things around the site. And then this is an orchard, which is to the front of the listed building, where the proposed access would go through and follow the line of an existing access track. So moving on to the proposed development, it would utilise the same access that I showed you in the photos just now. Part of that access would be slightly widened, the first 17 metres, to allow 2 vehicles to pass. The access then narrows to about 4.5 metres, and so a passing bay is proposed in this location here at the point of the cursor, just to allow vehicles to pass. And then the access would curve off to the east, where there is an existing access track to serve the proposed development. So this is the proposal, which is for 16 houses. And my pages. So proposal is to set out the development in a way that looks like a farm group effectively. So there would be this smaller yard here, which would be aligned by various dwellings arranged as semi-detached or short terraces. And then a second larger farmyard style development with the dwellings fronting onto this sort of yard area. And in the centre of the site would be a farmhouse style building. And I'll show you the proposed elevations in a moment. But this would be 16 dwellings plus the change of use of an existing holiday unit at the point of the cursor now, which should add up to 17 dwellings in all. On a brownfield site. So moving through to the proposed designs. So these proposed units 1 to 5, would be located on that smaller yard section that I showed you. So these would be arranged as pairs of semi-detached buildings, and they would be finished in cladding with brick plinth detailing at the base, as would the shorter terrace of 3. Which is shown here. Then moving on to the units on the eastern side of the site, so that larger farmyard quadrant, and they'd be designed to appear as converted barns to reflect the agricultural character of the surrounding area. And then units 10, 11, 16 would all look the same, again, trying to look like converted barns. And then units 12 and 14 would align the southern section of the site near the holiday unit that I showed you. These would be lower single-storey buildings. And then unit 15 would be the farmhouse style development right in the centre of that courtyard, to act as a sort of a reference point for the development. And this is just a cross section showing how those buildings would work. So you can see the farmhouse, which is in this location, would be the principal dwelling, with the barns then arranged around it, and they have been designed to have slightly lower roof heights, as would be typical of a farmyard setting. And then just a little bit more detail in terms of the West White Greenway. So the proposal is for a 1.75 kilometre section of the Greenway to be constructed at the developer's cost, or landowner's cost, I should say, in the location shown here with the cursor. And I just put in some views, which councillors might remember when visiting the site, just showing some of the views from that cycle track across Thorley and Wellow in this location. And then this is what the cycle track looks like in terms of its existing footings. It is a former railway bed, and so it is quite well made up. It's finished with gravel on top of a chalk, I'd imagine. And so it will be retopped by the landowner. And it would form part of a wider cycle network, which can be seen here on this plan. In terms of Wellow, it would come out of the application site here, and then along this road, which is what is shown on the right-hand base slide. It would then head off to Newbridge and along Quarry Lane, which is what's shown on the top right-hand side, and then off to Elm Lane in Kelbourne, and then off hopefully to the east towards Newport. A section of that cycle track has actually now commenced. So the right-of-way authority has started the cycle track at Freshwater Bay, and that's currently being constructed, which has made a start. And so this development would link with that to take the cycle track from Wellow all the way through to Freshwater Bay. In terms of why this application has come back to committee, it relates to nitrates issues. So previously, the development was proposed to be served by a biobubble treatment plant. That won't change. That will still treat the sewage from the site. But due to changes in how to calculate mitigation issued by Natural England last year, the calculation is that there would now be a slight gain in nitrates to protected sites in the Solent rather than the reduction. So the applicant has proposed offsetting that gain in nitrates through taking out of production an area of agricultural land shown with that roughly drawn triangle there on that slide. Natural England have agreed that that would be a suitable form of mitigation, and therefore it is recommended to be included within the legal agreement, which is due to be signed within either this week or next week. And so the application is recommended for conditional approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. There are no public speaking on this issue because it has, as we said, been determined before. So we'll move straight to questions from the committee, if there are any. Any clarification? Councillor Quirk.
You described a bit of it as an orchard. Is that just tree land, or is it an actual orchard?
Yes, so thank you, Councillor Quirk. So just at the point of the cursor here, there is an existing orchard on the site. That won't be affected by this development. It will be retained, but yes, it is existing, and the farmer does use it for the fruit that they crop from there.
But the other woodland that they're planting is all native species.
Yes, so they've undertaken existing planting on the site, as the report says. That's not needed planning permission, obviously, but that's been done through a higher level stewardship scheme with Natural England or DEFRA. And the proposal is to add to that through the mitigation, and again, it will be native tree planting.
Thank you, Mr. Guard. Any further questions? Councillor Churchman.
Yes, on page 55, talks about surface water, etc., going into Thorley Brook, and does not require an attenuation pond. I would like to ask the officers whether they totally agree with that, because it isn't the amount of rain that falls anymore. It is the sheer weight and volume of rain that is causing different bits of flooding around the island. And looking at those pictures, this is a low-lying area. The hills behind will obviously drain down. So will Thorley Brook be able to cope with this extra water from the housing, as well as the occasional, in fact, not so occasional anymore, torrential rain? I really am worried about that. We could be creating a situation of flooding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guard.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so as your officer report says, actually officers don't agree with what the FRA said in terms of drainage strategy. What we have argued in the report is that there does need to be on-site attenuation. Our view is that the site is large enough and there's significant hard standings so that attenuation tanks could be put into the site. And there is a recommended condition that drainage should be agreed prior to the commencement of the development. And we would expect to see attenuation tanks put on site to collect surface water from it. And during a flood event, those attenuation tanks can hold the water. And then after a flood event has passed, they can then start to release it at an agreed rate and stop adding, stop the development to adding to any kind of flood event that happens in that area.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does that answer your question, Councillor Churchman? If there are no more questions, then I think we may proceed to the debate if members feel that that is necessary. Are there any comments or we could have a proposal for a motion to either approve or otherwise? Thank you, Councillor Quirk.
If we're going to debate it, we should have a motion to debate. I move that we accept the recommendation of officers.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Are there any seconders? Thank you, Councillor Andre. In which case, I think unless anyone has any comments they wish to make, we will go straight to the vote as that is on the floor. So all those in favour of accepting, thank you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
And against?
1.
Any abstentions? Thank you. In which case, this matter is approved. We will then proceed to our next item on the agenda, which is application reference 22/01793/FUL. This is the Barnfield Solar Farm east of Wilmingham Lane. And I understand that Mr. Van Pullenberg, you are going to be presenting on this.
Thank you, Chairman.
For those online, we are just experiencing a few technical issues which will hopefully be remedied very shortly. So please bear with us.
Thank you, Chairman. We're good to go. So the application for members is Barnfield Solar Farm. The application relates to 42 hectares. 42 hectares of agricultural land to the north of Tapnell Firs and Wilmington Plantation. And there's also land in between Tapnell Firs, so Wilmington Plantation to the west, and Tapnell Firs sink to the east. The application it wraps around the woodland and say there's some development zones also to the east of the Tapnell Firs woodland, located here and here. The application site also includes 3.9 kilometres approximately of public highway, and that extends northwards along Broad Lane and westwards along Main Road Thorley through Wellow to Shalfleet, and ultimately will terminate at Shalfleet substation. And a part of the substation land is also included within the application site area. And I say the public highway land and the substation land is predominantly to include the cable route to connect the solar farm proposal to the grid. Okay, so yeah, so again, the public highway land along Broad Lane, and then extending eastwards along Thorley Main Road to along Wall Station Road and Warlands Lane to Shalfleet substation. Say the main area of development sites here, and here, which is between the woodland and obviously extending and wrapping around to north and east. We have residential properties along Wilmington Lane to the east, to the west. There is residential properties along Thorley Street to the north, and existing residential properties to the east, Dog Kennel Cottage, and also a converted agricultural barn. And there is a current Dome Meadow holiday development that is off this access road. Proposed accesses are generally, there's one which is the construction access, the existing agricultural access for the west off Wilmington Lane. It is also proposed to have operational accesses from the field access near Dog Kennel Cottage, and also the other existing agricultural access to Dome Meadow to the east. Again, for members, this is just an aerial photography, so members can appreciate it in its more physical form. We have the existing Wilmington Solar Farm to the south. I say the development would extend through here to the north. And again, we've got Wilmington Lane residential properties, Main Road through to Shalfleet this way. And again, we have Tapnell Farm located to the south east. Just to give members a quick rundown between the original proposal and the revised proposal. The original proposal was for 7 development zones. Development zones 1 and 2 are encapsulated within and between the woodland. Development zones 3, 4 and 5 originally were to the north of the woodland off Wilmington Lane. And development zones 6 and 7 were the eastern zones which currently remain. It was also proposed to have access from Tapnell to the south, and there was another northern access that was shown here. The revised proposal has omitted the southern access from Tapnell Farm, and that has helped to reduce any hedgerow loss. It's also removed the northern access that was substandard visibility, and this northern corner through here, which was previously development zone 4, has now been omitted, and development zone numbering has been altered accordingly, with these now being development zone 3 and development zone 4, with 5 and 6 to the east. For members' information, this is a Google map which shows the current Wilmington solar farm site. And then the numbers here relate to the proposed development zones. So we've got development zones 1 through 6 numbered for reference. And then we also have the existing solar park at East Afton Farm. There is another one at Tapnell Farm here. We have one at Lee Farm through here. There is other ones towards Shalfleet, which include the Homestead farm here, and there's another smaller farm on another farm just to the north of that. In total, it's approximately, they generate about 25 megawatts. This solar farm proposes 28 megawatts on its own. In terms of looking at the indicative site layout, members will note that effectively the proposed array layout will span for most of the development zone. However, there will be buffers between the woodland. With the ancient woodland, there will be a minimum 50-metre buffer zone, and the tree report that's been submitted does set out the construction exclusion zones to protect the woodland. I'll just move through. In terms of just going through various plant and machinery, the arrays are fairly typical in terms of being 3 metres to height, angled, and a minimum of 900 mil above ground level. The 900 mil is also to ensure that they're above predicted flood levels near Barnfield Stream that runs through the site. We have containers which are to contain the inverters. They're generally 3 metres in height and would appear similar to shipping containers. Proposed substations, there is the network operator substation, which is generally 4 metres in height, and we have the customer substation, which is about 3 metres in height. And then proposed perimeter fencing and CCTV is generally timber posts, weld mesh fencing, and CCTV, and that would be about 2 metres in height. There'd be small gaps left that mammals could go through the fencing, and then generally the CCTV would be about 2 to 2.5 metres in height, all in. Going through the development zones, just so members have got a better idea of the indicative layout. And we have the properties over here off Wilmington Lane, further to the south. This is development zone 1. And members see the general proposed indicative layout, the woodland, perimeter fencing and CCTV, and the access paths that generally will flow through. The pink rectangles on the plans that I'll show you are where the inverters that look like shipping containers would effectively be sited. This is development zone 2. So again, this extends from 1 to the west and through to the north, with Wilmington existing solar farm to the south. Again, the inverters are centralized within the middle of that array arrangement. This is the horse paddock site. So this extends through from development zone 2 beyond the woodland that is Wilmington Plantation, and we have Tacknell Firs Plantation here, and we have properties off Wilmington Lane and a construction access. Members would have saw on site that's opposite where the development zone 3 is. And again, the array arrangement, and members will note proposed hedgerow planting to the west and north of that. Again, members, we have development zone 4. So this was the emitted zone, which was previously development zone 4. This was previously development zone 5, has now been renumbered. And ultimately, members will note public footpath Y1 that we walked on our site visit, which extends through to Wilmington Lane and Broad Lane to the southwest. I've just included a couple of photos on here. So this is taken from the public footpath, and this is looking northwest along the footpath back towards Wilmington Lane. And this one is taken from the site access, which is over here, looking towards development zone 4. Development zone 4 would extend roughly in line now with this woodland here. Turning to the eastern development zones, development zone 5. Again, members will note the inverters that are centrally located. This is the network operator substation, which is about 4 metres in height, and this is 3 metre height customer substation located. And again, the access through the woodland through into the more southern of the easterly zones, and the public footpath running through to the north. Again, the last development zone, where we have, again, the arrangements. We've got it set away from the woodland with the perimeter fencing. And again, we have construction access that would run to the south of the existing access to Dome Meadow. Members will note down here that Dome Meadow is shown. And I've got some better images that I'll show you in a second. This photo here is taken from Broad Lane at the northern access, and that is looking back, and you will note that this is where development zone 5 is, and this development zone, development 6, is in this area here, which is more towards the horizon. And then looking northwest, this is Tacknell Firs that runs through here. And then effectively what we're looking at is we're looking generally in this direction. So this area here is this area of woodland through here, and then the dog legs through here, which again is this area through here. In terms of looking at neighbouring properties near development zone 6, we have the converted agricultural barn, and we have Dog Kennel Cottage. Dog Kennel Cottage and the agricultural barn are approximately 140, 150 metres away. This photo is taken looking at the western side of Dog Kennel Cottage, and this photo is taken looking at the access room and the front of Dome Meadow, which again is through here. And again, the eastern boundary of the site is approximately 120 metres away from Dome Meadow domes. And again, the mitigation planting is indicated through here for the hedgerow planting on the outside of the perimeter fencing that's proposed. Just flicking back a little bit, just so I can mention that in terms of Wilmington Lane, the separation distances from the Wilmington Lane properties, 230 metres to the east of the western edge of development zone 4, and about 45 metres from the proposed western edge of the hedgerow planting to development zone 3. Some images that were presented through the environmental statement for members to consider. This shows the views from the Downs to the south, and members will note the existing Wilmington Lane Solar Park. This is the 15 years on, and members will note, although it's quite hard to see, that the development extends through here, and there's also an extent through here. Dome Meadow is very, very hard to see on here, but Dome Meadow is through here, and Tapmore Farm is to the east here. This is taken Broad Lane. Again, it's very hard to perceive from the imagery, but ultimately this is taken from public footpath Y1, and development zone 6 is through here. There would be a number of arrays that you would see following development within the first year, but within 15 years there is proposed hedge planting along the boundary to help screen it from view. And then this is some imagery from the environmental statement that was showing the development zone 4. So ultimately development zone 4 is in here, and we're looking southwest and southeast, and it would extend through here, ultimately the proposed hedgerow planting. And here's the array that's shown. Now this was obviously based on the original proposal, so the actual panels themselves now would be set further back, and they would come back further in line. But again, after 15 years, this is the indicated hedgerow planting to screen development within that area of the site. Some other views for members to consider. We've taken these, officers have taken these from the old railway line that runs from where On the Rails is to the west at Yarmouth. That's photograph 1. And again, you can see from this distance, it's about a kilometre away. So it's fairly imperceivable, but you will see currently a bit of open green land to the north of the woodland. And then the second photo here is taken as you come through Mill Copse, and you come out of that, and you can get a glimpse of the site towards roughly where development zone 4 is, and the previous development zone 4 in the horizon there. Turning to the access proposals, again, as I've mentioned previously, the proposal originally had the northern access here, as well as the southern access, which is to be used for construction. I would make the point to members now that the construction access is only from this construction access on the western side of the site off Wilmington Lane. The northern access to Broad Lane and the southern access are both for operational traffic only and will not be used for construction. There is a temporary access that is proposed that runs through the north here, but that runs internally from this construction access beyond the hedgerow along the north, and then along the outside, and then back in to the eastern zones to provide connectivity west to east during construction only. That would be removed after construction and land and hedgerow reinstated. In terms of comparison of the new plans, again, the temporary northern access is through here, and it shows this area being omitted. And the access point here and the other 2 access for operation points only. In terms of the construction access, the only proposals to alter it would be there's visibility displays to be provided that require a little bit of hedgerow cutback. Members will notice on the site that it's grown out over the summer. But otherwise, there would be mitigation planting as well that would run through to the east and north of the development zones. And if I can just take a look down here, members will note that the access will need to be widened near the junction by a metre to accommodate Arctic vehicles during the construction period, which is approximately 18 weeks. Just going back to some photos, that's the current existing access and the hedgerows looking to the north and to the south. And the application is recommended for conditional permission. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr. Van Cullenberg. That's very helpful. We will now proceed to the public speaking element of this agenda item. So if I could invite Mrs. Martha James on behalf of the West White Village Residents Association to speak for 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here on behalf of West White Village Residents Association. In this year's Contracts for Difference, £190 million will be used to subsidise wind and solar farms. We do not accept building on greenfield land just because it is cheaper for investors. Why would we allow the same principle not to apply to solar farms? Ancient woodlands, sinks and solar panels don't work well together. They compete for sunlight. This scheme is against policies SP5, SP6 and DM2 because of these designated environmental assets. In the 2012, the AONB officer sought an assurance that there would be no further extensions to this site, and the planning statement for that application said, the area is constrained by the need to avoid shadowing from existing trees, and it is not possible to extend the site. That assurance was worthless, but the same constraints remain. What value should we give to the assurance of land restoration after 40 years? In its net zero network investment study, SSEN stated that reinforcing the island's grid for renewables would cost £55 million, and the grid capacity required for the latest scheme at Barnesfield Farm simply doesn't exist. Residents have sent you photos of the shading of the site, and when the officer showed his photos of the site, the sun was at the highest point. The residents are concerned that if approved, the scheme would put significant pressure on the trees, which are ancient woodland and a sink due to the shading. So they ask that the latest extension to be refused due to policies SP5, SP6 and DM2.
Thank you, Mrs. James. We then move on to Mr. Peploe.
I lived at Dog Kennel Cottage off Broad Lane from 1994 to 2012. That's 18 years. To promote recreational tourism, since its inception, have led to date 142 walks in the Isle of Wight walking festivals, the majority in West White using footpath Y1 and Broad Lane on numerous occasions. I have therefore witnessed the farming of the land at issue, employing local labour successfully, albeit not as lucratively as it were covered in solar plans, not employing local labour. I have witnessed the constant daily use by local residents of footpath Y1 from Broad Lane to Wilmingham Lane. This proposal will vandalise it. I have witnessed how long tree planting for screening took both by myself and by others along section of footpath Y1, a minimum of 10 years in such a windswept location. It is windswept because it is clearly visible for most part from Wellow Down, westwards to the golf course, Tennyson Down and beyond to Head and Warren and across the River Yar, all AONB. The fact that the applicants have withdrawn Development Zone 4 is an admission that the application is flawed. Most of the site can still be seen from the AONB and impossible to screen without major tree planting taking years to be effective. Despite this token alteration, I invite you, as we've heard, to look from Mill Copse, look eastwards, and you will still see Development Zone 5 without screening. Solar parks may be a necessity today, but there are already several well-screened ones in West White, including a community one. If this application is granted permission, it will make the Isle of Wight AONBs indefensible from further undesirable applications adjacent to them. And I believe on the presentation, there is an error. The barn above Dog Kennel Cottage is now a domestic dwelling.
Thank you, Mr. Peploe. We then move to Mr. Nicholson on behalf of the CPRE. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, councillors, good afternoon. My name is Edward Nicholson. I'm speaking in my capacity as chair of the CPRE of the Isle of Wight. I'm also chairman of a renewables business, Crossflow Energy. The CPRE has two comments. Firstly, the CPRE is not against solar farms, but it believes that these should be roof mounted or on brownfield sites, not on greenfield sites. Barnfield being greenfield and adjacent to an AONB is the wrong side. Secondly, and more importantly, The Planning Committee report is silent on the connection to the grid and the implications of the constrained Isle of Wight network capacity. This is a significant issue given that power generation will be intermittent and variable, and the CPRE therefore questions how a project of this scale, quite large in terms of the island's power needs, could prudently be recommended without clarity on these critical aspects. There is also the presumption that the objectives outlined in the proposal have been validated, although there is no comment on this. If not already undertaken, an independent technical report should have been commissioned to evaluate the deliverability of energy and the timeline for so doing, given the 50 million plus price tag for upgrading the network. The council and the community need to be reassured that the project is viable with the existing infrastructure and that there are guarantees in place about future infrastructure provision to ensure that a valuable rural setting is not being developed for a suboptimal outcome. Without such an independent and objective review, Barnfield risks becoming the island's HS2. Plenty of energy, but with restricted ability to distribute it and none to store it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. My name is Sam Dix. I'm the planning manager at Low Carbon. There is an error on your speaking list. I'm down as being from AECOM, who are our agent, but I am on behalf of the applicant, as you've pointed out. You'll be pleased to hear I won't take up the full 6 minutes that have been allotted to me, but nevertheless, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'd also like to thank your officers who have worked with us over the last year in a professional and dedicated manner to reach the point we're at. A firm recommendation for approval with no objections from specialist officers. Finally, I'd like to thank all the local residents who engaged with us during our initial consultation last year, and also the 40 or so people who have written in support of the application. The development itself is a 28 megawatt solar farm that will provide enough power for 9,300 homes and displace 5,000 tonnes of CO2 each year of its 40-year life, at which point the land would be returned to its current use. I don't think you need me to tell you the scale of the climate emergency or the recent pressures on energy security the country's faced. You have your own goal of a net zero island by 2030 and a strategy to roughly treble renewables capacity on the island over the next few years. On top of this, we also need to consider the future electrification of our transport and heating networks. But nevertheless, our proposal will deliver 10% of your current requirement in one fell swoop. This is the main reason you should support the recommendation. Grid availability on the island is scarce, as you have heard. But quite simply, we wouldn't bring this forward. We wouldn't have invested so much money in a planning application if we had not secured that. Development could be online within 2 years and well before your 2030 target. I'd like to touch on some common concerns, some of which have been addressed by the objectors before me. So firstly, we do recognise people's concerns about visibility, and that is why we took the decision to remove a sizable area of solar panels from the development. The Isle of Wight AONB partnership had no objection even before we took that step. And if the climate emergency you have declared is exactly that, an emergency, then everything possible should be done to allow renewable opportunities to come forward. It will not be possible for the council to reach net zero without some change to the local landscape. What we can do is minimise harm by removing the most sensitive areas, which we have done, and mitigate any residual impacts through extensive new planting, which we will also be doing. Secondly, you may also be concerned about loss of farmland or food production. In truth, this is not a particularly high quality area of land, as one of our landowners has attested in a letter you may have seen in support of the application. Much of it is used for non-food crops already, and in any case, the UK is generally self-sufficient in cereal crops in particular. The removal of this land from farming for 40 years will have no appreciable impact on food security, and in fact, resting it for that period of time will likely improve its condition. In contrast, the benefits of clean energy for over 9,000 homes a year are a tangible, positive outcome that we could all be proud of facilitating for future generations. I'm sure many people would point to rooftop or brownfield solar development. Indeed, we've just heard that. And indeed, we would support that too as a company. However, the scale and speed of what is required means that these options simply won't get the council to where it wants and needs to be in the next 7 years, or more realistically, 6 years now. The development also brings with it a host of biodiversity benefits that your officers rightly give significant weight to, such as wildflower meadow planting, and to confirm absolutely no ancient woodland would be removed as part of this development, and I believe that's secured by a condition that would be enforceable by yourselves. As a certified B Corp company, Low Carbon is also proud of its work within local communities, such as learning opportunities for school and a community benefit fund for local projects. In summary, the Isle of Wight needs this development if it is to have any hope of meeting its goals. We desperately need to reduce reliance on fossil fuels and secure locally produced energy. The scale of the climate and energy crises has never been greater, so I'd urge you to acknowledge this by voting in favour of the recommendation before you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Dix. Now follows a statement by the local councillor, Councillor Spink, who has presented his apologies as he is unwell. So to remind anyone as to what this involves, essentially the local councillor isn't constrained by time, and this is not me as chairman speaking, I'm speaking essentially as Councillor Spink as the local councillor. Thank you. So Councillor Spink draws attention to the national planning guidance, which states that, quote, all communities have a responsibility to help increase the use and supply of green energy. But this does not mean that the need for renewable energy automatically overrides environmental protections and planning concerns of local communities. The deployment of large-scale solar farms can have a negative impact on the rural environment, end quote. In deciding this application, therefore, it will be necessary to consider and weigh up both the advantages of granting permission and the disadvantages. The advantages: it is said that the solar farm would provide sufficient renewable energy to power circa 9,300 homes per year. The disadvantages: the community appreciates the need for renewable energy, but raises the following in respect to this particular application. One, the network on the island is nearing capacity. The application does not include battery storage of the electricity produced. Electricity generated by this application cannot therefore be stored and will be lost if the grid is unable to accept it at the time that it is generated. I, Councillor Spink, note that Wight Community Energy, WCE, has stated, quote, the electrical network on the Isle of Wight suffers from a constrained connection to the national grid. The existing infrastructure is unable to accommodate any new generation because during peak solar periods in the summer, energy generated from solar farms reaches the limit of the network capacity, end quote. The connection to the grid is at Shalfleet, 3.9 kilometres away. Has this been taken into account when determining the number of homes this application is likely to power? Has the amount of shade and reduced production in the winter been taken into account? It is submitted that the above raises doubt regarding the assertion that the application will produce sufficient energy to power 9,300 homes. Planning Committee cannot properly assess the merit of this application unless it can determine how many houses the application will power. Further, the application will not necessarily power island homes. The grid will determine whether the electricity goes to the mainland or not. The loss of 92.4 acres of greenfield for at least 40 years will undoubtedly have an adverse effect on the locality, the tourist economy, and the enjoyment of the homes of those who live nearby. There are already a number of existing solar farms in close proximity to the application site, and the local community has already, therefore, made a significant contribution to renewable energy. The West Wight Landscape Character Assessment states that the open, remote character of the area, with its wide views and sparse settlements, should be preserved. SP1 of the 2012 Island Plan states, quote, in all cases, development on non-previously developed land will need to clearly demonstrate how it will enhance the character and context of the local area, end quote. It is difficult to understand how 92.4 acres of solar panels and associated infrastructure surrounded by a 2-meter perimeter fence with, quote, danger warning notices and CCTV cameras could be said to, quote, enhance the character of the area. Paragraph 174 of the NPPF states that, quote, planning policies and decisions should contribute to and enhance the natural local environment by B, recognizing the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, including the economic and other benefits of the best and most versatile agricultural land and of trees and woodland, end quote. How does this application comply with this national policy? SP6, quote, within areas of protected and sensitive landscapes, development should generally be small scale or community based. It is further stated that large scale photovoltaic schemes will not be located on grade 1 to 3A agricultural land. This application is not for a small scale or community based development, and 20% is to be on grade 3A agricultural land. The development would be harmful to the nearby AONB and to the view from the Downs AONB. The local community is at a loss to understand why the AONB partnership has not objected, given that they only accepted the existing solar farm on the undertaking that there would be no further extensions. This application is a further extension and a breach by the landowners of this undertaking. Public footpath Y1 runs through the development site. Public rights of way has stated, quote, at present the path is a field edge stroke crossfield path in a rural stroke agricultural setting with views of the countryside. It is considered that enjoyment and amenity value will be significantly reduced if planning approval is granted, end quote. The economy of the West Wight depends heavily on low impact tourism. Tourists do not want to hike around solar parks. A number of nearby residents' quality of life will be adversely affected, together with the quiet enjoyment of their homes, in some cases for the remaining years of their lives. In conclusion, I ask you please to give very careful consideration to weighing up the pros and cons of this application. Greenfield land is already in demand for housing, and there is not an infinite supply on the island. Ought not greater consideration to be given to solar on rooftops of public and privately owned buildings and car parks? This would allow the expansion of renewable energy while retaining at least some of our precious greenfield. On behalf of Peter Spink, thank you. We now move, therefore, to questions from the committee, if there are any such. Councillor Quirk.
Just to seek an absolute clarification from officers that when this if this was passed, this will remain agricultural land, and if in 5 years' time it was removed, the panels were removed, it is not brownfield site, it is agricultural land. As soon as they removed, it's back to agricultural land. Can you confirm that?
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Mr. Van Cullen.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Yes, the planning condition requires, there was several planning conditions. One of them agrees with the land management plan, so it agrees how the land will actually be used and managed whilst the solar park's in operation. There's another condition which actually is similar to a number of other conditions that are put on our solar parks in the West Wight, which effectively requires that at the time it's no longer used for power generation, or that the 40-year life ends, whichever's the earlier, that the land, that the plant and equipment is removed and the land is restored back to its agricultural use.
Councillor Quirk, does that answer your question? Thank you. Councillor Churchman.
Yes, could we please go back to the slide that shows right at the beginning where the other solar farms exist? Right, with your cursor, could you just point out which are existing solar farms? I think there's one on the left, isn't there?
So this is the existing Wilmington solar farm. So that's to the south. There is one at East Afton Farm, which is here much smaller scale.
2,
There's another one here, which is at Tapnell, smaller scale.
3,
We have one here, which is spread out through multiple fields, which is at Lee Farm.
4,
We have another one here, which is Homestead Farm, I believe, at Shalfleet. And then there's another one, well, forgive me, I can't remember the name of the farm, slightly to the north.
I make that 6. Am I correct?
Yes, that's all the ones that I pointed out to you.
Right, my next question is, has anybody ever done any research into the climatic effect that solar farms cause? Because you're covering fields with virtually reflective stuff. Does that have any impact on our climate? Has anybody ever thought about this or done any research into it? Because I've heard in the past where there have been enormous fields of greenhouses, it has actually affected the local climate. Now, this to me is a similar thing. I mean, the answer is yes or no, but.
Sorry. So I think the answer would probably be yes, although I wouldn't like to reel off studies that you know, I haven't read necessarily. But I think for the purposes of this application, the application needs to be determined on its own merits. The report goes through the positives and the negatives, how officers see it in terms of the environmental impacts of this particular scheme, and it's for councillors to consider that as well as their own knowledge in terms of making any decision on this application.
Thank you. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you just, could one of the officers clarify that the solar energy that's produced by the solar farms on the island is actually, when it, I'm no expert on electricity distribution, you'll be pleased to know. But my understanding is that it enters the grid and it is used locally before any overproduced energy goes off to the network off island. Am I right in saying that? It doesn't go off up a cable off to the mainland, then get redistributed back to the island. That's not how electricity distribution works, is it?
I can't really answer that. I'm not an expert in terms of how the energy network operates, I'm afraid. So yeah, sorry.
Well, if I could say, my understanding is that is the case, that it doesn't disappear off somewhere and then be brought back. It's used locally. And while it's being produced, it probably is, certainly during daytime, is probably powering schools, homes, businesses, shops, whatever. Here potentially, you know, places like that. So I just thought that's an important point to make, that I don't think that, and I'm no expert, but I believe that electricity produced by solar farms is used locally. It's the overspill that would be reliant on the cabling to the mainland. And I think that's just an important thing. It would be good to have clarified.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense, certainly from a sustainability perspective, that's how it operates, and I would have thought that is how it operates. I mean, and yeah.
Please, Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Also, is there any data or knowledge of what battery storage systems are potentially going to be installed on the island? I was approached by a developer that wanted to put battery storage systems into my ward. And there was conversations, but no applications come forward. I don't know how long-term battery storage systems are going to be relevant with the technology and batteries changing so quick. But are there any sort of current or upcoming applications that we know of for battery storage systems to be installed on the island?
I'm not anywhere, there's none proposed for this application. I'm not aware of other sites across the island, apart from obviously we've got one before us in a minute, which does have battery storage proposed as part of that development.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Councillor Churchman.
I'm still not clear. When the electricity is created, it goes into the grid, the national grid, and the landowner then receives money for it. But that means if it goes into the grid, it goes off the island and then comes back to us. No? So that the electricity that's produced is actually kept within the island.
The grid is there as across the country, and you move the electricity from where there is sufficient or excess to where there's shortage. So, you know, if we're not using electricity locally, it will be used in the grid and shifted elsewhere. If we haven't got enough at night, these things won't produce anything. We import. And I think the situation is actually the island is pretty much net zero during the day, but imports at night.
We seem to have shifted organically into the debate part of this agenda item, so I propose that we move therefore towards that unless there are any questions. Councillor Stewart.
Just one minor question. Oh, don't have minor questions. None of them are minor. In terms of the community benefit, can you actually specify exactly what that would be?
I think the main one would be the fact that, as the applicant pointed out, this would generate 10% of our local target towards the requirement for self-sufficiency in terms of renewable energy generation. So in terms of community benefit, I would argue that the main one is that. There is a environmental benefit in terms, or community benefit in terms of the amount of biodiversity gain that would result from the proposal. Members will obviously read through the report in terms of other benefits. It is proposed by the applicant to also improve part of the public right of way through the site in terms of making it usable as a public right of way. Again, in terms of other benefits, as we've heard from other councillors debating, that energy generation would be utilised locally as well as being exported to the grid.
Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you. That's very helpful, and it confirms, I think, what I understand, which is there is no direct community benefit in terms of monetary benefit to specifically parts of the community.
There is no proposal to directly provide any contribution to the community. However, obviously members will be aware of the letter from landowners that they themselves obviously would benefit from other things such as farm diversification and income streams from the development.
Thank you. I think we should therefore move forwards to maybe a more robust debate amongst ourselves. Emma, please.
I work representative for local town and parish councils, and there are two councils that have commented on the application, and I would ask for your indulgence that I read a statement based on each of their responses to the information.
Please.
Shelfleet Parish Council objects to the application for the reasons already stated by themselves. In support of their applications, I would like to make the following comments. The applicants in their supporting information suggest that this application be considered as an extension of the neighbouring solar farm also in their ownership, which according to their own website currently creates 6.757 megawatts of energy with an installation capacity of 7 megawatts. This application is for 28 megawatts. Lee Farm, Wellow has 5 megawatts. Homestead Farm has 10.7 megawatts. Stables Farm, Shelfleet 1.5 megawatt, and Durrance Farm, Porchfield 4.5 megawatts. This is an overall capacity of 56.7 megawatts. The LPA is able to consider consent to solar farms of less than 50 megawatts, after which applications are considered by the Secretary of State for Energy. Government guidance for renewable and carbon energy states cumulative impacts require particular attention, especially the increasing impact that wind turbines and large-scale solar farms can have on the landscape and local amenity. As the number of turbines and solar arrays in the area increases, and protecting local amenity is an important consideration which should be given proper weight in planning decisions. Part of the committee's considerations may include whether the SSE network has the capacity to support the energy produced by the combined solar farms on the island. SSEN stated in January 2021 that the island has lots of green energy potential, but the network is at its limit, and they have indicated that any additional embedded generating capacity on the island will be subject to periods of curtailment, in effect turning off the solar farm's ability to export to the grid. In 2021, the capacity of the Isle of Wight was 44.5 megawatts. In the applicant's conclusions, they state in 9.1, the site will assist in meeting national targets for both energy supply and low carbon energy development. However, as the LPA continues to receive applications for solar farms, we may consider whether the loss of good grade agricultural land, local amenity, and the possible impacts these farms may have on tourism are appropriate if there is not the capacity of the network to export the energy they produce. The applicant states in their supporting information that this is their intention. The committee may like to consider that until SSEN can confidently utilise any produced solar farms energy the farms produce, they may end up being rather large white elephants on the island. We may also consider writing to the MP and asking him to support and push the agenda forward for the island to be able to fully utilise the 3 interconnector cables already in place. And the second comment, which is much shorter, you'll be delighted to hear, is from Yarmouth Town Council. Yarmouth Town Council request, if the committee is minded to grant approval to this application, that a clause be added to the legal agreement based on the following recommendation: that for the productive life of the solar farm, an annual contribution be made for the benefit of the local community, that the monies would be managed by Yarmouth Town Council with clear criteria as to whom may apply and be awarded any monies from that grant. Yarmouth Town Council suggests an initial award of £20,000 be made in year 1 and subsequent awards will be increased using index-linked calculations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of Planning Committee who wish to speak? Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I must say the one thing that I think this, aside from all the obvious issues of the landscape changes and what this would look like, and the loss of the farmland, there doesn't seem to be anything that brings any actual community benefit other than we're ticking a box and saying, yeah, we're going to produce a load of green energy, which is great. Don't get me wrong. But I am surprised with an application this big. If this was a housing application, we'd be all over it looking for some kind of financial gain for the local residents to enjoy some additional or improved services. And there doesn't seem to be anything like that. So I think I don't have anything to put forward, but I wonder if any other committee member has considered that during this debate. I do want to go back to the solar energy parks. We've got to really understand, no disrespect to anyone on this committee and in this room right now, but we are not overall the younger generation. When we turn down green energy producers and applications, we're potentially putting energy at risk for younger generations. You go and ask a 25-year-old out there whether they think we should be approving a wind farm or a solar energy park, and they'll tell you absolutely. They don't want us digging ground up and extracting oil. I've been on this committee for turning down a wind farm. I've been on this committee for turning down oil drilling. I have been on this committee for the anaerobic digestion plant. And I've been on this committee for solar parks. There are for and against of all of them. And I absolutely respect the local residents and the community's view. But being a Newport councillor, we've got the same thing in Newport. We've got solar parks surrounding Newport. I've got them in my ward. Probably every councillor here has got one in their ward. And we're about to debate another one that's on the edge of my ward. They are a necessary evil, I'm afraid. It's something that doesn't have a lot of moving parts. Things don't wear out. I know that panels break and there are upgrades and issues that need dealing with. But you haven't got a load of moving parts and things that wear out. Once they're in place, they're producing energy quite quickly. And on that basis, I'm fairly pro the idea of solar parks in comparison to other types of energy. And bearing in mind, I come from a motor trade background. I love oil burning cars, far better than electric cars, I can tell. But the fact is that the future is not in fossil fuels. It's in renewables. And you go out and ask a 25-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 35-year-old what they think we should be doing to provide energy for the future. It's not going to be turning down solar parks, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Andre, then Councillor Brodie.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I should declare an interest here, as I have invested in solar panels on my own house. But it does give me, I think, a level of understanding here, albeit that a difference of 4 kilowatts and the amount that we're looking here is a substantial difference. I think one element of this green energy solar parks that I'm not sort of aware has come through yet is the balancing of the grid. It's not just about producing energy, it's the timing of it is very, very important. And it's considered between 4 o'clock in the afternoon and 7 o'clock in the evening that this is the peak time when our demand for energy on the island goes up. It's also seasonal because obviously, as we've already heard, it's dependent on solar. And I've certainly noticed from my own system that obviously the longer summer days and the intensity of light does actually obviously make that difference. I know that we are considering this application on its own merits, but as Councillor Price, I think, alluded to, there is the opportunity for storage. And what that storage does is it helps to actually balance out the demand for solar energy. So I think it's, in a way, it's a little bit disappointing that this application, and perhaps the officer could, and I'm not aware that the applicants, has that actually been raised at all, the opportunity for storage, or was it always going to be just directed straight into the grid?
It's not been proposed for storage. It's still not proposed. So it's not been proposed as part of the application, and it's still not proposed as part of the application.
Okay, I mean, that said, I think on balance, and that's what we are called to look at here on balance, I think the advantages to me outweigh the disadvantages. I think, though, I would, with Chair's indulgence, Councillor Cox actually did moot a recommendation from Yarmouth Town Council. And I think has been highlighted here, there does not appear to be a tangible community benefit. I think that's what we're looking at here. I mean, there will be long-term benefits through green energy, but a tangible community benefit. I'm not sure about the amount that was put forward, but I think if there could be some negotiation as to an amount on an annual basis, I mean, it could either be done as a set amount or possibly even as a percentage.
Thank you.
I think that would be a good option.
My understanding is that the policy environment does not exist necessarily to make that a possibility, but Mr. Baldwin, perhaps you could shed some light on that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to confirm to members to hopefully aid in your deliberation, there is no policy framework in terms of our local plan policy that requires any such contribution to be made, and I'm not aware that there is anything explicitly in national policy that also requires it. That said, members could consider whether such a payment is appropriate, but of course what I would imagine that you'd be doing when you deliberate that point is thinking about the wider viability and the principles at stake in terms of what the application is in front of you today. It would be challenging for us to secure anything in terms of this sense through condition, because we need to be very clear about the harm that would be mitigating against, and my gut is telling me that such a condition on such an issue wouldn't comply with the tests. However, I think there's been a very clear sort of voices across the chamber picking up on this issue. So to recap, no policy basis for such an ask, but that would be something that members could ask for, but would need to weigh it up in the round. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin.
I may just come back in
certainly.
briefly. I think perhaps I think what we're looking at is effectively, just to clarify, something akin to what would be a Section 106 if it were to be a housing development.
Mr. Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair. I think that the point here I make, councillors, is that we are looking at the application in front of us, and the application in front of us is for a particular use. So it's a bit difficult. We're starting to maybe, if I can suggest, sort of trying to compare apples and pears, as it were.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Councillor Brodie.
Thank you, Chair. My concern over a lot of what we discuss regarding the future is the short-termism that we sometimes hear expressed to us. And I agree with a lot of what Councillor Price said, and I say that as one of the older generation now, you know, I've been an officially estate pensioner, which surprises me considering how long I've been here. We're having a discussion about community benefit. And I mean, Councillor Price is absolutely right. Younger people, if they were watching us now, would not understand why we're having this discussion. They really wouldn't understand why a bunch of older ladies and gentlemen are sat around here not wanting to support things like solar energy. And we've seen it in the past with wind turbines on the Isle of Wight as well. I think we have to think in terms of a much longer term, in terms of what community benefits there will be. We have to move away from fossil fuels. This country and this island is part of the United Kingdom still, is far too dependent on fossil fuels. Countries that I abhor in the Middle East, with gas from Russia. I'm not quite sure what the situation is there with the situation in Ukraine. And we've lost most of the fossil fuels that we used to have in this country, though there is still some oil under the North Sea being extracted. But there will be a community benefit in the longer term, in my view, in terms of the provision of self-sustainable energy sources through solar, through wind, through tidal, all the rest of it, that I can see will be reflected in the pricing structures of energy in the future. It may not affect my bills. You know, I'm not going to be here in 30, 40 years' time, I shouldn't think, unless there's some miracles of science. But in 30 or 40 years, if we're self-sustaining in terms of our energy supply, we're going to see that reflected. We're not going to be dependent on Middle East countries. Many of us around this table recall, you know, the oil crisis of the mid-70s. I was 16 at the time, you know, but when the Western world was held to hostage effectively, economically, by the Middle East countries such as Saudi Arabia. So I think to start worrying about, you know, a few quid here and there for the local community here, when we're addressing something for the longer term, when the vast majority of us won't be around as this develops, I think is a big mistake. When you read the report, it's quite interesting, the ratio of objections to supporters. Quite often we see overwhelming opposition to housing applications and 2 or 3 people in favour. This one's only 3 to 1. There are 40 supporters of this application and 118 objectors. Yes, I agree. That's in terms of the people who responded, that is still a majority of objectors, but it's a significant number of people who supported this application. And finally, and I will make a proposal I'll just say to Councillor Cox, she represented the view of 2 members of the council, councillors of IWALC. My council's a member of IWALC. I don't believe we were consulted. I suspect if Newport and Carisbrooke Community Council, we are a community council, not a town or a parish council, if we'd been consulted, we probably wouldn't have had any problem because, as Matthew says, as Councillor Price says, we have solar farms all around us and increasingly they're being put in place. And it's this usual thing that urban situations have to take the pain and the rural don't. I don't support that. And I therefore propose that we accept the recommendation from officers for conditional permission to be accepted. And I'll look for a seconder. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie, and seconded. Thank you. I'm conscious that, sorry, I realise, Councillor Jones-Evans, I was thinking in terms of our moving forward, how to deal with this, which essentially is there is now a proposal on the floor. I believe I am entitled to move things forward, but I wish to keep things brief. So I will take Councillor Bacon. You wish to speak. So Councillor Bacon.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Brodie has actually said quite a lot of what I would want to say, and I would have happily jumped into second of his proposal as well if I'd not been beaten to it. Because I was listening to Councillor Price who asked the question, where's the benefit? And then I think you answered it. And the simple phrase was the future. We have got to move away from fossil fuels. So I'm going to repeat Jeff a little here. Councillor Price's business is going to have to change because he's going to stop selling petrol cars at some point. We're going to stop using gas boilers. This is all within our lifetimes. It's going to happen very soon, and we need more electricity. Those things that are powered now by fossil fuels will become powered by electricity, and it needs to be green electricity. We have to have strong regard to climate change and all that causes that and all the effects it has. So, as I say, I agree pretty much wholeheartedly with what Councillor Brodie has been saying. I think also one thing that should be added, we've heard comment about the grid and its capacity, and figures from 2021 were quoted. But of course, we have seen in the last few weeks that Ofgem have visited the island, have recognised that we have an issue with our connection to the grid, but are bringing forward a change to that, either by freeing up one of those cables to facilitate the development of renewables on the island, or they are talking about, if that can't be done soon enough, building a fourth cable. They are prepared. They are talking about being prepared to spend the frightening figure, somewhere between 30 and 50 million, to do that because of the importance to the grid, to the network, but to the island and to the development of renewables. And I think we should have that in mind and be supporting this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. With the indulgence of Councillor Brodie and Councillor Jones-Evans, Councillor Quirk, you had registered that you wish to speak first. I don't know if there's anything you wish to.
A very quick one. Along the lines of what Jonathan was saying, the constraints are man-made. You know, there's a grid connection from the power station that's used about once a year, and it's a man-made thing that says we're not using that, so it's, you know, that's easily sorted. The other thing was in terms of looking for local benefit. I think there is a benefit to the whole island from this, which has been said before. But even with Section 106 money, it's meant to mitigate and be specific and not a slush fund. And there's a lot of people who aren't aware of the planning law, who see 106 money as a slush fund, and it's not. It's not something you can just sit there and do something with in the future. It has to be identified to mitigate the impact of the development that you're talking about.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. So we have a proposal on the floor from Councillor Brodie, seconded by Councillor Jones-Evans. Councillor Churchman, you forgive me, I'm going to try to be a little bit stricter in accordance with the Constitution. So I am going to move forwards on this matter. So we are going to go to a vote. So those in favour of accepting the application, thank you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Thank you, that's unanimous. Carried. I believe we've been in meeting now for 90 minutes. How do people feel about a 10-minute break? I think it's warm. So convening at 20 to 6. Thank you. I can call everyone to order. It's now 20 to 6, so we will recommence with application reference 22/01585/FUL. This is land to the northwest of White Rails Road, west of Park Road, and inter alia. The planning officer is Anne Braid on this matter, but Mr. Russell Chick is going to speak and deliver the presentation. Before doing so, I believe we have a declaration of interest from Councillor Bacon. Councillor Bacon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have realised that the Mr. Oliver Goodman, who's listed on our speakers list, is actually Mr. Oliver Goodwin, who is known to me as the legal advisor of a trust I'm a member of. So I think I should declare that as an interest. It's non-pecuniary, so I think I'm entitled to stay and vote, but I thought I should make that open and transparent to everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. Yes, certainly. I don't think that presents any problems at all. Mr. Chick.
Thank you, Chairman. So, yes, the application site is located just to the west of Wootton, 100 metres west of the dwellings in Park Road. I'll just get the laser pointer up. Here we are. These are the dwellings in Park Road. The application is 100 metres to the west of those. The application site is located alongside sorry, I'm sort of struggling to read stuff and have the mic there. But yes, so the application site is immediately adjacent to White Rails Road and covers an area of 32.5 hectares, but it's split into two halves. The first to the north of the road is 27.2 hectares to be used for solar panels. And then the second section is located to the south, where the red cursor is at the moment. That is to be used for battery storage. And it amounts to an area of 5.3 hectares. The access to these two sites would be via existing accesses onto White Rails Road, one at the point of the cursor here at the moment, and the second through the access to the barns that are on the southern side of the road. So the proposal is to install solar panels in the location at the point of the cursor here. The gaps through the site are due to way leaves for existing infrastructure. And then you can see here off to the south, the proposed area for the battery storage. Just for locational purposes, Butterfly World is just off to the south, and there are existing properties, which I'll show you in a moment, photographs of those properties, which are onto White Rails Road and Park Road as well. I wasn't at the committee site visit, but apparently a resume of existing sites was asked for in terms of solar power. So I've just shown those sites on this slide here. The first is a site located adjacent to Fairley Road, which isn't visible from the application site due to the lie of the land. That has a capacity of 7.25 megawatts, covering an area of 12 hectares. The second one is the solar park that is currently visible from this location and adjacent to the site. That covers an area of 18 hectares and can generate 6 megawatts per year. And then the final smaller solar park is located opposite to Brittlesford Lodge Farm. That's the straight road that connects Robin Hill and Wootton. And that has a capacity of 250 kilowatts, so much lower than the other two, on an area of 1.47 hectares of farmland. Those have all obviously been built and are operational. Just some photographs of the existing properties close to the site. The first being Benham, which is located opposite to the application site and the proposed access at the point of the cursor here. And I've shown a photograph which isn't as good as I'd hoped it would be, to be quite honest, but no doubt you saw that property on site. It's got quite an open frontage and looks straight towards the application site. The second one is Hillgrove House, former school many years ago. That overlooks again the application site. And the third and final property that I've shown in this slide is Knollwood, which is the half timbered property, which is located to the east, right alongside the site boundary here, and is obviously on the northern side of White Rails Road. I do have to come out of presentation for a moment just to show some other photographs of the site which haven't gone into the presentation for some reason, but I'll quickly skip through those. So this photograph is of the application site. As you can see with the words there, it's taken 15 metres in from the boundary, and that's at the lowest point of the site where the proposed site access is. You can see in front of you in the back, Fatting Park Copse, which is ancient semi-natural woodland and designated for that reason. And then just skipping up to the next one, which is taken actually alongside the road, the same view, but looking down the access track, which serves Fatting Park Copse. And obviously you can see there that the southern portion of the application site. Then skipping on to another photograph, which is looking from the same gate, but looking up the hill. So looking off towards Park Road, and you may be able to see just at the point, sorry, the cursor has to be white for these. That is Park Road over here in the distance, and you can just see the side elevation of Knollwood, which is a half timbered property, which I showed earlier on. And then moving further up over the hedge from White Rails Road, that hedge at the moment is slightly lower than is planned. It's going to be allowed to grow up to 3 metres in height. And then looking in from halfway up White Rails, looking southwest across the site back towards Fairlea. And then just showing some of the boundary treatments in the surrounding area. Looking towards the site, this photograph is looking outside of Hillcrest towards the site. Again, this is Hillcrest itself, or Hillgrove. And then looking over the site towards, looking over the hedge towards the application site. So I'll come back into the presentation proper, skip through the ones that we looked at. Right, so the proposals involve the solar panels. They would be up to 3 metres in height. They'd have a face depth of 7.1 metres, and I'll show that in a plan in a moment. There would be various substations across the site, 4 in total, sorry, transformers, they're called for these purposes. And there would also be a site hut at the entrance to the site, just here where the laser pointer is, and that would include just general maintenance equipment that would be used if the park is granted planning permission. And then looking at the panel side views, very similar to the ones obviously we've just discussed. As I said, about 7.1 on the face, 3 metres gap, and about 2.7 metres high, with 0.9 metres for the front of the panel off of the ground. And then a cross section showing how those panels would relate to White Rails Road. So that is showing White Rails Road in cross section with vehicles on it, the existing hedges, a proposed what they called an instant hedge. So the proposal is to put in a laurel hedge that would be 2 metres high when planted. And that just shows how views on a car or someone going along that road would look for those panels with the buffer strips in between. Battery storage, as I've said, would be located off to the south. It would be 120 metres in width, 45 metres in depth. 230 metres west of Brittlesford Lodge, over here. Brittlesford Lodge here. And it would contain 8 groups of 5 containers arranged in lines from east to west. There'd also be a battery storage substation, which would be this red roof structure here. And that would be 10 metres wide, 17 metres deep, and it would be 6 metres to the ridge with an apex roof. And then just showing some of the landscaping proposals for the site. It is proposed to have a native scrub woodland mix planting scheme. Most of those native species would get to around 2 metres in height once mature. That would run alongside the areas shown in yellow, and that would combine with the proposed instant hedge, which once the landscaping had established would then be removed. And then there are some photo montages just showing how the site would look at year 1. So this is looking next to Norwood, as you can see, the situation today with no panels on the site, and then the situation in a year's time with that 2 metre high laurel hedge planted with the panels just showing there. But as I've said, the proposal is to let the existing native hedgerow grow to around 3 metres in height and not cut it to the height it is there, with a landscaping scrub mix in behind it. All that landscaping would be native species, and then showing a photo montage of the site looking from the southern end. This would be the site access. So as the situation is today, at the point of the red cursor, looking up across those agricultural fields, and then the proposed situation with those solar panels in behind the hedge, with that instant hedge in front of them. And again, similar view. This is from Park Road off to the north of the site for that finger of the application site that will pass closer to the east, showing the application site as it is now at the top and as proposed with those panels in place. And then finally, a photo montage of the site from greater distance. So looking across towards the application site here where there are currently no panels, and then showing how it would look in year one with those panels in place. And then just showing a cross section then of the battery storage area off to the south. This shows the changes in land levels. The area would be surrounded by an acoustic fence of up to 4 meters in height. It would then have the containers within the site, which would be the battery storage vessels, and then the proposed substation building, as I said, with an apex roof alongside it. The site would also be surrounded by fencing for security reasons. That fencing would also include, 2 meter high security cameras. I think they're every 10 meters. Yes, every 10 meters, which is standard for existing solar parks on the island. So, Chairman, the application is recommended for conditional permission.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. We move then to our public speaking element. If I could invite Mr. Luke Nathan Davis to speak for 3 minutes. Thank you.
Sorry, 2 seconds, I'll just get my notes up. This one won't connect to the local grid, by the way. Hello, committee members. My name is Luke. I'm the commercial forester by trade, and I own Fassam Park Copse, which is the ancient woodland in those photos there. It is one of the most rare and vulnerable woodlands in Britain. It's irreplaceable and is currently being deforested by an adjacent solar farm, which is in administration just to the left of that picture, there on the left picture. To summarise the developer's application in a minute and a half is no mean feat, but it's not as difficult as forestry. As a professional forester with a science degree, I'm very familiar with government guidance and why that guidance must be applied, especially in regards to ancient veteran trees in ancient woodlands and vulnerable receptors. The application before us today has consistently failed to follow basic government guidance, and that is apparent from their most recent site layout plans and Swiss cheese ecological surveys that recommend planting highly invasive native species without appropriate mitigation. The applicant's surveys contain so many errors that I wrote a 150-page review on the applicant's inability to and refusal to follow government guidance, which applies to all of us. The consequences of approving this insufficient application in its current form will increase sewage pollution into the ancient woodland and SSSI receptors in an already polluted watercourse. Overland sewage issues are well documented, and the development's drainage ditch is aimed directly at the sewage overflow zones. The proposed indicative drainage layout will not be adequate in coping with 270,000 litres per 1 millimetre of rainfall on that field. Even with retention ponds and tanks, the size of the tanks and ponds would have to be over 500,000 cubic metres. It's just not feasible. The proposed drainage will obviously alter the hydrology of the entire eastern edge of the woodland. This will disturb ancient unchanged precipitation streams within the forest, which provide habitat for joint rarest plant on the Isle of Wight, not calamint, but chaffweed, which does not occur on any other site on the island. Any change to hydrology, such as the one proposed, will likely cause extinction of at least one vulnerable species. The Copse has a huge range of red list species, and surrounding designation sites will suffer from the removal of 96 acres of BMV browsing and foraging land. barely any of which have been identified or mitigated against by the proposal. Scientific research shows the red list species will be adversely affected by the panels. Flooding from the existing solar farm and from the adjacent woodland has similar drainage systems which have increased flooding. I have commissioned arboricultural reports which identify the cause of deforestation of the western solar boundary, being the solar park existing. The proposal's battery systems also provide a disproportionate risk to the environment and designated sites in the area. As the proposal provides no mitigation to fire risk and foam runoff, a fire at this BESS station next to a watercourse and another ancient woodland will permanently damage rare ecological habitats. No impacts have been analysed on the ancient woodland system adjacent to the BESS system. Buffer zones don't follow government standards. Buffer zone guidance and root protection areas are clearly defined for veteran trees, 15 times the diameter of the tree, which is far beyond 15 metres.
You can still conclude. Sir.
I can conclude. There is no explanation why this application and others have failed to show this pertinent government.
I beg your pardon, sorry, I misread the line. It was red. I apologise. So if you could, yeah, thank you very much. Apologies. I would now like to invite Mr. Oliver Goodwin speaking on behalf of Mr. Ben Coleman, who is unable to attend. Mr. Goodwin, please. Right.
Press? Okay, apologies. Three heads of areas where this application should be either refused or deferred. You've heard the first, environmental matters, and there's a distinction between this application and Barnfield. The first is that it's more environmentally sensitive, that you may have picked up. The second is that the officer did not require an environmental statement, unlike Barnfield. So detailed material was not submitted in order to be assessed. And that's the weakness, which is extraordinary, given that the national body, Natural England, did require an appropriate assessment of the even more sensitive environment here. The second issue is power generation. Look, to assess the benefits of a scheme against the harm, you have to know the extent of the benefits. And to know the extent of benefits, you now have to know how much power from this scheme can go into the grid. And you don't at all. It's clear. It's not entirely the member's fault, but it is the officer's fault because it was not addressed, touched upon in either of the reports. Now, the council has the information. It's in the Ricardo report, which was commissioned by the White Community Energy, relatively recent, and it's all in there. But that means, I can tell you the outcome, the council has no idea when the constraints on energy outlined by CPRE and Councillor Spink in his read out item will be resolved. So the council has no idea if any energy can be produced by this park, 20%, 50%. There are 3 solar parks within 1 kilometre of this site, 2 of which are not in operation, one's in receivership and one's being dismantled. And you need to know this information because you can be permitting a white elephant. Now, Jonathan Bacon said there was a meeting with Ofgem last week, very recently, and they may find 50 million to put in further capacity. That's great, but no idea when. And the life of a permission is 3 years. And Ben Gard will advise you that if it's not reasonably certain that an application can be developed within the life of a permission, it shouldn't be allowed. The other distinction is this scheme, the applicants haven't given written evidence that they have a contract with SSEN, and Barnfield did. And these applicants are curiously silent on that point. The third is legal rights of way constraints on the site where land is in the hand of third parties, which can't be overcome. And those matters are in the hands of lawyers. And those are in representations, but are not addressed in the officer's report. So the councillors are not informed of those legal issues.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. I could like to now invite Mr. Barry Hailston, who's the chair of Wootton Parish Council, to speak. Mr. Hailston.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you, and councillors. I'd just like to clarify one point, because it would appear that that the parish council had lodged an objection to this work. That's not true. I'd just like to read out exactly what we actually fact submitted after due consultation between us all. says that the parish council supports the renewable energy. However, we have material planning concerns about this planning application, which are as follows. One, lack of acceptable flood risk assessment as per the objection from the Environmental Agency. Concerns raised by the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Rescue Service with regards to battery energy storage system and the implications of a fire there. And three, the lack of a plan in regards to the ongoing management of the biodiversity gain. And finally, four, the parish council expresses surprise that the Isle of Wight Council did not request an EIA, even though this could become the biggest solar farm on the Isle of Wight if agreed. If these conditions that we raised are met, then we would have no difficulty in putting forward our approval to this site. However, we are very conscious of the fact is that electrical power is in dire need everywhere in our country. And the more electrical that the government imposes upon us to have electrical vehicles, the more need for more electrical power is required. And one has got to say where and when and how is this going to be produced. The simplest way, it would seem, is solar panels. Atomic is not good because it leaves pollution of magnitude, which we cannot obviously foresee that could explode in the future. Fossil fuels are now on the decline. So where is our electricity going to come from? Not just for transport, it's for home, running your fridges, running your freezers. And if people have got illnesses where they need to keep medication in their freezers, in their fridges, then it is necessary for us to have a sustainable supply of electricity. Providing, and I've mentioned this, providing all conditions raised by all parties interested in this matter are met, I see no reason why you as councillors should not actually fact agree to such an enterprise, providing that it is properly controlled and any condition that is raised and is met and then subsequently is, how can I say, overcome or diverted, then appropriate action should be taken by the council. I rest my case, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Helston. I'd like to now invite Mr. Johnny Murphy on behalf of Ridge Clean Energy, the applicant, to speak. You have 6 minutes. Mr. Murphy.
Good afternoon, members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. As discussed, my name is Johnny Murphy and I'm the Sunny Oaks Renewable Energy Park Project Manager. As a company, we've been delighted to work on the island, and through our own consultation and engagement work, we've seen a groundswell of enthusiasm for the project, which is born out of the relatively and noticeably low levels of public representations made on this application. At Ridge Clean Energy, we've been impressed with the knowledge and the passion shown by younger generations who don't tend to represent themselves during these discussions about both the energy and the climate emergencies, the need for renewable energy, and the direction of travel we must all follow to a sustainable future. This translates into the Council's own climate emergency declaration and the environment strategy seeking to deliver Mission Zero. I'm sure you're all aware that there's an overall aim to become self-sufficient via renewable energy. Sunny Oaks is an excellent opportunity for the island to utilise and store, through our proposed batteries, its fantastic solar radiance. We have secured and demonstrated grid connection into the local electricity network by the local substation on adjacent land to the project, which avoids lengthy cable disruptions. This, as agreed in your officer's recommendation for approval, makes Sunny Oaks an optimal location. Each year, the development has been accurately calculated to generate the same electricity as that used by approximately 5,150 Isle of Wight houses. Many of the environmental specialists that we have used live on the island, and we have drawn on their detailed local knowledge to design a scheme that strengthens local biodiversity, retains valued and ancient trees, with a commitment to environmental enhancement that has learned from and augments the local landscape. The extensive planting of new native scrub, wildflowers, hedgerows and trees is designed to protect the near views of the site, yet retain longer distance views of the landscape beyond, all whilst resulting in a substantial biodiversity net gain. The planting and an interception ditch has satisfied drainage advisors. A 15-metre protective buffer from ancient woodland has been retained in accordance with government guidance and approved by your tree officer in his consultation response. We commit to planting that buffer to create a natural tiered woodland edge. The scheme maximises the use of land less favoured for farming, given its physical separation to the north White Rails Road. The development has been scientifically assessed as being grade 3B or lower in terms of agricultural land, which is not best and most versatile. Indeed, the development would secure and diversify the income for a much loved and valued local dairy farm, which would thrive as a result of the development and on decommissioning, regain the land with a higher organic carbon content ready to continue farming. Only livestock feed is grown on the site, so there's no impact to food availability for humans. And we work closely with Bridleford Lodge Farm, who desperately want this proposal to happen. We've engaged positively with statutory consultees, resulting in no objections from Natural England, the Environment Agency, Island Roads, the EHO, your tree, ecology, archaeology and drainage officers. We've comprehensively engaged with the community, writing to surrounding parish councils, presenting to Walton Bridge Parish Council, and sending newsletters inviting local residents within 1 kilometre of the site to 2 public exhibitions. Our community partnership coordinator continues to build relationships with local groups and local initiatives. An annual community trust fund, which we want to work alongside the community to implement, would be available for the duration of the development, continuing that good work that we're already doing. This is all outside of the planning system, but it's what we do as an organisation across all of our projects because it's the right thing to do. We care about what we do and we care about how we do it. As recommended in their report, officers consider the significant contribution to local renewable energy would bring itself significant economic, social and environmental benefits. And as you may be aware, there's a permissive footpath being proposed through the solar panels as well. One project alone cannot solve global issues, but there's no one project that can. It's necessary for the collective contribution of a range of projects to come together and work to solve the issues we face today. And the Sunny Oaks is such a project. I urge you to favourably view this application as part of that solution, contributing to Ireland domestic energy generation, helping prevent climate change, energy poverty, and alleviating the energy crisis for generations to come. And it's on this thought I leave you to your decision today, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I shall now read out a statement on behalf of Councillor Sarah Redrup, who's unable to be here today. So this is from Councillor Redrup. Thank you all for taking the time to consider my comments on behalf of the residents of Wootton Bridge. I'm sorry that I can't make it today in person to read them. As one of the sunniest places to live in the UK, the Isle of Wight has a fantastic opportunity to contribute towards national and local targets of achieving net zero carbon emissions. I welcome plans that aid us on this journey. There are many reasons why this location is a good choice for the Sunny Oaks Renewable Energy Park. Conveniently located near the local electricity distribution network, the park would be utilising grade 3B agricultural land that the landowners say they have limited use for. As energy parks are temporary structures, the island would benefit from renewable energy while also retaining the agricultural land for future generations. From their application, I feel that Ridge Clean Energy have considered how the land can be cared for during the operational period so it can continue to be of agricultural use after the park has been dismantled. However, there are also some genuine concerns raised by residents over the risk that this park might pose to the ancient woodland next to the site. Residents in Wootton wish to see the island's valuable natural landscape cared for. With that in mind, I would also like to encourage the committee to carefully consider the risk that the plans may have on Fatting Park copse and adopt the following mitigations put forward by the Forestry Commission. 1, increase the buffer zone between the development and Fatting Park copse above the existing 15 metres. 2, use native non-invasive trees as part of bolstering the ancient woodland and existing trees and hedgerows that complement and enhance local species and habitats. 3, use sustainable drainage systems to reduce the impact from runoff, which has been locally reported as a significant concern. 4, consider creating a fire break to reduce wildfire risk. And 5, avoid impacting or removing existing hedgerows and trees as far as possible and maximize efforts to retain connectivity. Ridge Clean Energy have demonstrated a willingness to listen and work with the community in Wootton Bridge. They have responded to concerns from statutory bodies and residents by adapting or clarifying their plans. They have also offered financial support to community projects, connected with local educational providers, and have tried to engage the community in the shared goal of achieving net zero. I hope that if plans are approved, this willingness to work with the community will continue throughout the construction period. I would like to encourage Ridge Clean Energy to work closely with myself and with Wootton Bridge Council to ensure that disruption is minimised and residents' concerns are listened to and responded to throughout. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to amplify the voice of a young resident of Wootton Bridge who took time to comment on the application. Tilly, a 17-year-old college student, and some of her classmates represent the next generation who are worried for their futures. In her comment, she said, quote, "There is not a button to press to save the environment. It is something we must work together to do bit by bit. And here we are lucky enough to be handed on a plate a big step forward." End quotes. That is the statement of Sarah Redrup, local councillor. So there's a couple of elements which arose out of public speaking, which officers are going to speak to. So I'll invite Mr. Chick if you'd like to address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Only a couple of points picked up from public speaking. The first is a point made correctly that the application for this site isn't subject to an environmental statement, whereas the site at Barnfield, over at Wellow, was. What I'd remind members of is that the assessment of whether an application results in significant effects and therefore needs an environmental statement is based on the character of the site and the surrounding area, nearby sensitive areas, and the proposals that are put forward. Officers obviously undertook those EIA assessments separately. And the view was that the site at Wellow required an environmental statement based on landscape impacts, mainly because the site would be visible from the Airbnb and Heritage Coast, and because a right-of-way runs right through the site, and the site was very visible, and also because of its location in a more expansive landscape setting. That area through Wellow is very flat, and so it's quite visible from a number of locations at various distances. The EIA assessment for this application concluded that it did not need the environmental statement, and that was because the site is relatively contained and the impacts would be localised. So councillors will remember from visiting the site on Friday that the site is in a bit of a valley. It is quite enclosed, and it is a significant distance from significant receptors such as the Airbnb or Heritage Coast. So there are different characteristics for the two areas, hence a different conclusion for the EIA screening opinion. Another matter mentioned was about securing long-term biodiversity net gain. That is important, but condition 8 of the planning permission requires a biodiversity gain plan to be submitted to the planning authority, and that would include a requirement for long-term management for the lifetime of the development, which of course is 40 years. I hope that helps, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. Councillor Jones-Evans.
So presume we go into questions now, are you, Chair?
We are, if
Yeah.
you're happy to proceed, yeah.
I've got two questions on different topics, if I may. The first one really is following from what Mr. Chick has said about the biodiversity net gain. I do have some concerns, and actually echoed in the comments of the new local member, and congratulations to Councillor Sarah Redrup on her election. Yeah, I'm a bit concerned because the Forestry Commission have asked for an extended buffer zone. Yet this isn't being taken forward, as I understand from reading the papers. And we've just heard from the owner of Fatting Park Copse, who's a professional forester, that has equal concerns regarding this ancient woodland. And while we're talking about the future, we always have to protect what is precious to us, and that is our ancient woodlands. And we're very lucky on the island that we have so many. So it's always about balancing out, isn't it? So, you know, my question is really, how are we really going to get the a net, a net gain on this? It says you got the number 8 of the conditions on page 147 says there's the mitigation, mitigation will be, the plan will be developed. So, but who is going to be feeding into that if we're not sort of taking on board the, what the Forestry Commission is saying? So I know it's very complicated, but if we have got very special species here, we have to protect them. And if the Forestry Commission are asking for a wider buffer zone, I don't understand why we can't accommodate that. And with all of the other, sorry, Vanessa. Oh, sorry, I think you said something. So yeah, I don't know how we can ensure that really. I guess that's my question. The second question is regarding the footpath, which is great to hear. We have a dearth of footpaths around this area. We need to sort of link up with the cycle paths and so on. So it's good to see there. This was just a moment it's a legal question, but it says the footpath will be available. So will it always, that's for public use, I'm taking it. So it won't be a designated proper footpath like N4 or whatever. But will there be a legal agreement that the public can use it for the life of the park? Those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones-Evans. Mr. Chick, are you able to speak to those matters? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Jones-Evans. I mean, in terms of the buffer strip, it has been assessed by council's arboricultural officer, who is also fully qualified tree officer, and he is extremely passionate about protecting trees. He's been called a dendrochronological zealot by people recently in complaints because he was so tough on people with protecting trees. His view is that a 15-metre buffer strip is suitable. That is what is set out in national guidance, is that 15-metre buffer strips are acceptable unless that strip needs to be extended for some reason. Now, the proposal is to have the buffer strip. The panels would then be set back from the buffer strip itself. So you have a 15-metre buffer strip that would be planted with woodland edge planting. That would be native planting, and the council's tree officer considers that is a suitable buffer strip for ancient woodland. One thing I would say, and it's not a criticism, is that the Forestry Commission often asks for wider buffer strips than the 15 metres. It's a consistent comment, but our tree officer considers that would be suitable for this site. In terms of the footpath, it would be a permissive path, so it wouldn't be adopted into the local rights of way network, but it is secured by planning permission if granted via the conditions. So that would be there for the lifetime of the development.
Thank you. You may, yes.
Yeah, just regarding the buffer strip, I hear what you're saying about the Forestry Commission always asking for a bit wider, and our tree officer obviously looking at it from a tree perspective. But I guess my concerns are for the other species that are within this ancient woodland, so the animal and flora as well in there. Will they be protected? Because it's not just about trees, is it? It's a whole ecosystem here. So I guess I feel I need to have assurance that this will be protected.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the question that planning officers and our tree officer will always ask ourselves, and our ecologist as well, who also hasn't objected to the scheme, is what is the likely harm from this development to the ancient woodland and the species within it? Solar panels have no moving parts. They're a fixed element of infrastructure. They've been installed in different places on the island next to woodland. We've not had any complaints before about it harming the woodland. And the tree officer's not informed me as being the officer for most of those sites, and it's caused harm to protected woodland. So I think if there was a concern about protected species or species of trees or whatever biodiversity is in that woodland, which is clearly there, we'd need evidence to show what that harm would be. And our consultees, including Natural England, council's ecologists, have not raised those as a concern. So I think it would be difficult as officers to actually say, well, what is the harm?
Thank you, Mr. Chick. I have councillors Price, Bacon and Brodie. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with a lot of what Councillor Jones Evans has just said. And while I don't want to be known to be stalking people that look after bits of woodland around the island, I do take an interest in it. And you have to listen to people like Mr. Davis, who clearly understand the ecosystems of woodland, and he's obviously studied the species and so on that exist in his land. And so we do need to carefully consider any impact that it may have on that. So I think I would just, again, on the back of what Councillor Jones Evans has just asked, first of all, could the committee, and would it be reasonable for the committee to ask for a bigger buffer, a wider buffer? If we ask for a wider buffer, you know, could the park stay the same size and narrow the gap between? No, okay. You know, would it be unreasonable for us to ask for a wider buffer? You know, I mean, it's 15 metres at the moment. Would 20 metres be, you know, would it wreck the whole project? And secondly, my other question was about the public right of way, which obviously it sounds like that would be adopted as a public right of way for the time that this project's in place. So that's been answered. But if you wouldn't mind elaborating on that, please.
Councillor Price. Mr. Chick.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the trees, we've received comments from the council's ecology officer, who's now left the authority, but she sat on the biodiversity partnership. She's well aware of the various ecological issues for designated sites, be they designated for international reasons, nationally or locally, as this site. The ecology officer hasn't raised any concerns about the proposed development. So to increase the buffer strip would have the disbenefit, if you like, of removing capacity of the renewable site. So it would no doubt reduce capacity. The gaps through the site have to be the size they are because of wayleaves with the various infrastructure providers, energy providers on the island. So I think that ultimately, yes, committee has the choice. That, you know, it is the chamber's choice whether they ask for those buffer strips to be increased, but there has to be a good reason for doing so, and it's difficult to justify that from an officer point of view if the consultees are not saying it needs to be undertaken.
Thank you, Russell, and you know, I'm listening, but I just look at the site plan, and the section to the middle to the left that's against the woodland. The gap between the park seems to widen as it goes up through. Does that not give any margin for some sort of realignment? Am I imagining it, or is it just the way I'm looking at it from where I'm sat? It looks like it widens towards the top, is it? And is there, if it does widen, is there a reason for that we can't overcome by you know, realigning those panels that side?
Yeah, I mean, that widens because that's where the wires are. So just to the south of the site is a huge substation that SSE operate. And that obviously is very important in terms of the island for energy. And the wires pass through this site off to where they're going, and they start to widen through this site. And that is a wayleave that the applicant has to adhere to as part of agreeing the development with the infrastructure provider.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. Councillor Bacon.
Thank you. I think the general concerns have been set out in by the two previous speakers. I've got quite a specific question that then flows from that, and that is whether the biodiversity mitigation enhancement plan that is required by the proposed condition 8, to what extent that will or could address the concerns that have been highlighted, or indeed can we specifically request that it do so to gain some comfort in relation to the matters that are causing concern.
Thank you, Mr. Chick.
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. So the biodiversity mitigation plan seeks to mitigate the impacts of the development itself within the development site. So we can only actually require a condition to control something that is within the red line area of the site. We obviously have the drafts of what biodiversity mitigation would be for this site. I think with the various planting around the site, with the wildflower mix that's going to be between the panels, biodiversity net gain is somewhere around 60%. The national requirement for biodiversity net gain is 10%, so it's significantly above that. In terms of impacts on any species outside of the site, that is something that is looked at through the various ecology surveys that the planning authority receive, and obviously we ask our ecologists to look at that. There weren't any concerns raised in terms of impacts on the ecology in Patton Park Copse. I think the issue that was raised was potentially pollution and flood waters coming through Palmer's Brook, but the proposal is to have ditches, gravel filled ditches on the site, which will intercept the water, the surface water during a rainfall event, and the planning authority's local lead flood officer has agreed that those would far exceed the capacity of a rainfall event, and therefore would prevent an issue of flooding in Palmer's Brook, or increasing it. As I understand it, the flood officer is investigating current issues with the Grange Farm solar site, which is further to the west, which I showed you. And although that's obviously caused some issues for Palmer's Brook, it has been helpful in showing us what this site could actually create in terms of impacting on the brook, and then further on through Patton Park Copse. And so the lessons learned from that site have fed into the mitigation for this site in terms of the flood attenuation, which would be those large gravel ditches through the site. And so officers do consider that, so the impacts on Fatting Park have been considered.
Yes, certainly. Mr. Bolser, please.
Thank you. And if I could just follow on from Mr. Chick's comments there and just draw members' attention to paragraph 7.66 of your report, which does set out and give some commentary around the BNG and the benefits as calculated by using Natural England's, DEFRA's biodiversity metric calculation tool. That will give hopefully a clear understanding of the situation. What I would also add is, following on from this conversation and the point, Councillor Bacon, that you've made in terms of the draft condition 8 and the commentary around the biodiversity mitigation and enhancement plan, I think it would be only fair to note that officers have heard and have listened very carefully, obviously, to the debate and the issues raised this evening, and should members be minded to approve this application in front of you, then we would be taking away those issues discussed and raised throughout the debate this evening when thinking about signing or agreeing to the BMEP. And indeed, the applicant or the agent of the applicant is in the room and has, I'm sure, been listening intently as well. And I'm sure that they will be keen to address, as far as appropriate, some of the issues that have been raised as well. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bacon, you have a supplement.
It was really just a follow-up comment in light of what Mr. Chick said about the red line. But of course, the red line, within that red line is the buffer zone and the proposed planting. So I think what I suggested possibly still has some validity on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. Councillor Brodie.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions, 2 fairly straightforward. The first one, just me being a bit of an idiot. The security fencing, is that between the laurel planting and the panels? Can you confirm that's the case?
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Yes, so the cross section is quite useful for that. So that shows the existing hedge next to the road, new scrub, then the laurel, and then the fencing just inside of it.
Yeah, just want to be absolutely clear about that.
It would be hidden by the landscape.
Thank you. Secondly, ancient woodland. Can you just confirm that on the previous application for solar panels at Barnfields, there was an element of ancient woodland?
Now you're asking, I must have been a dream world when that bit was discussed. I think the, it's called Wilmingham Plantation, and that is ancient semi-natural woodland.
Captain Mr. Van Colenberg confirmed for those of us who were on the site visit that there was an element of ancient woodland. Can you also confirm me what the buffer zone is regarding that ancient woodland?
It was what, sorry?
What the buffer zone was on that section?
I can't remember what it was, I'm afraid.
I don't object, it's 15
All right, okay.
metres. So for the terms of consistency of this committee, we've already agreed an application tonight of 15 metres, and now we're quibbling about 15 metres on a different one. I think we need to learn to be consistent, particularly on the same night. Even I forget things from a few weeks ago. Thank you. Thirdly, more importantly, I'm inclined to support this application. I don't think you can't, given that I voted for the previous one. But I am a bit concerned about this right of way element. Just to give you a little bit of background, for a number of years, when I was a member of the Ramblers, which I'm not anymore, I used to undertake, not inspection, but ensuring that rights of way were being maintained within the boundaries of the former Newport Borough, which of course included Wootton, for anybody who knows that, and I used to inspect travel down all of those rights of way on a regular basis. And one of the things that always struck me, and there is a question here, so bear with me, Chair, was how it was almost impossible to connect with footpaths from the little town area south of Wootton to anything in Newport. And anybody who's tried to walk that area will know that you have to walk down Brittlesford Road or White Rails Road or something like that. And I do think we're missing a real opportunity here. Now, I accept there's an opportunity for permissive footpath here, but of course, permissive footpaths aren't for posterity. Permissive footpaths will end at a fixed period of time, and they generally do. So I've seen shorter ones disappear very rapidly that I used to use in the past. This one will be 40 years again, I'll be long gone. But I would rather have seen a right of way that would have connected from near the crematorium up at the top of Fighting Park Copse down towards Brittlesford Farm, because there's a right of way just across the road on Brittlesford Road. Can I ask, what efforts have been made with the Sunny Oaks people, Ridge, whatever they're called, to try and ensure that we get this for posterity rather than just accepting the permissive footpath, which I really do think is very disappointing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Anne Braid, please.
Thank you, Councillor. We did ask initially if there was any possibility of a footpath link all the way to Brittlesford Lodge Farm, which the right-of-way officer pointed out would have linked in with the public footpath network and would have been very useful. So I explored that with the agent and the applicant. And unfortunately, the landowner would have had enormous operational reasons for not doing it. At the moment, it's, as you saw, a dairy farm. And so the herds move around. He would have had to fix the herds, if you like, and not be able to move them as freely if there was a right-of-way. And there were the security issues as well as regards walking through the farm. And also, I don't think an enormous amount of that portion of the land is being given over to the energy park. So it would have been quite restricted as to where the footpath could have gone. It would have been very close to the BESS units. So they said they were not.
It begs the question, how is he or she going to manage it for 40 years? If they can manage it for 40 years, surely they can manage it for posterity.
But they're only managing it for vehicular access to the BESS as and when it's required.
What, sorry?
For vehicular access to the battery storage system as and when required. It wouldn't be public access.
Permissive footpath?
No, the permissive footpath only runs to the north of White Rails Road, along the lines of the wires, the
So
power
it will
wires.
not go across to Brittlesford
No,
Farm?
no.
Surely that's what the report says.
No.
That's very disappointing, I have to say. And I mean, that is almost a deal breaker for me, to be frank, because it is important that that area is opened up to the public, to be frank. It's a closed area with a number of the farms in that area. I've lived in this area for a long time. I walk it regularly, I cycle it regularly, and this is a closed area. Cyclists and pedestrians are forced onto main roads, etc., and in so many instances. And I do think that's a real disappointment. Is there no way in which we can try and press for that and make that a condition of this approving this application? Thank you.
Mr. Chick?
Yes, so I think the main thing to come back to is what are we trying to mitigate through getting those rights of way? And for any application, we need to, if we're asking for mitigation, if the planning authority asks for mitigation, it needs to be mitigating some form of harm. And I think for me, I would struggle as a planning officer to say, what is that right of way link mitigating? The harm in terms of local people being not able to get from Littletown or Wootton to Newport is not caused by the development, and the development won't increase that harm. It doesn't impact on any rights of way. It's not close to a right of way other than the cycle track to the north. The permissive path really is planning gain, as is the contribution that's being made to the rights of way network. And so I think we would struggle to say there has, to say the lack of a right of way connection outweighs all of the sustainability benefits of 20 odd megawatts of power. So that I think that's the struggle. I think from our point of view as well is what is the potential to gain that mitigation as well. If the landowner, who is not the applicant, has said it will impact on my farm too much and I don't want it, then the prospect of it is probably very, very low. So I think that that is what the committee has to consider, weigh that up against the sustainability benefits of what that solar farm delivers.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. Councillor Churchman, you wish to ask a question. Councillor Churchman, please.
A couple of questions. First of all, I notice that this is 32.5 hectares, which roughly 100 acres in old money. What was the size of the barn fields? I'm just trying to get the scales, because the barn fields is a one in 5,000, and this one, Riddlesford, is 1.2.5. So am I correct in thinking that the Riddlesford one is virtually twice the size of Barnfield? Because obviously the maps are totally two different scales.
You may need to bear with us for a moment, Councillor Churchman. Thank you.
That's right. Sorry, so the Barnfield site is 42 hectares. And I did go through it earlier on. The application site for this is 32. 32.5 hectares, of which 27.2 would be used for solar panels and 5.3 would be used for the battery storage.
Sorry, so what size was Barnfield?
Barnfield was 42 hectares. And then this application site is 32.5.
Because I think it's very important that members understand the size and scale of what I call the Wootton Common thing. How much space does the battery storage unit take up? It doesn't look very big on the map, but is it a fairly small enclosure?
So yes, the enclosure would be, just go back to my writing.
It's behind the actual farm.
I think it's 5.3 hectares, but oh, sorry, the area of the actual building, it would be 120 meters by 45 meters. That's the area where the battery storage part
Now,
would be.
how visible will that be from anywhere? Because the land round there is extremely flat. Is it? I'm looking at Anne, and not particularly visible. In fact, that will require a path off Riddlesford Road to get to the battery storage unit. Could that be a path eventually through to the wood? As a matter of interest, a suggestion even?
I think the issue we've got is that the farmer has said operationally no, they wouldn't
Yeah,
support
as I said,
a
just
right of way through.
going in. But
Yeah.
anyway, Yeah, no, thank you.
Right, thank you for that. First one is as much a point of information. Councillor Brodie has made a statement about these being very similar places. As a former botanist and former chartered biologist, I do actually know a little bit about this sort of stuff. Wilmington Plantation is exactly that. It is not indigenous trees. In fact, there's a very interesting collection of redwood plantation there, which is quite unusual. The ancient woodland there is very limited in terms of what it actually has to offer. When you look at Fatting Park, you're looking at something which is totally different. And therefore, given that this is a totally different and much more special site, would the question would be very much, is there any reason at all why we cannot extend the buffer by, say, 5 meters? Because one of the problems with biodiversity gain is that it actually fails entirely to deal with soil biodiversity. And when you're talking of ancient woodlands and associated permanent pastures, you're looking at a very complex and wide set of species, both fungi, bacteria and the like. So the question is very much, is there any reason at all why we cannot extend the buffer to at least 20 meters?
Check.
So as I've said before, I mean, ultimately, what reason is there to extend it? Why 5 meters? What does 5 meters gain? Particularly as this is farmland, the farmer could come onto the site and plough right next to the ancient woodland. The importance is that the council's ecologist has not objected to the scheme in terms of the width of that buffer strip, nor has the tree officer. Whatever biodiversity net gain achieves or does not achieve, it is adopted guidance and it comes in this year. And it says what biodiversity gain should be. And from our point of view, we will gain a biodiversity net gain plan through a condition, and it will need to comply with biodiversity net gain, and no doubt our ecology officer will make sure that it does. I hope that answers it.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. A supplemental, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you for that. Perhaps I should add here that I appreciate the efforts and expertise brought in by the planning department into this particular area. And I also think that this application itself is an extremely strong application. It has storage, which I think is one of the critical issues. It has an organisation which is prepared to listen behind it, which is also useful. However, we are dealing with ancient woodland. That means that you are talking of an ecology which has built up over hundreds of years. Disturbance to that from any type of development can have long-term consequences. As a planning committee, I would consider that is a planning consideration, and notwithstanding what some of the guidance is from departments, I think it is something that we should consider. I put forward 20 meters. My standard line is it's 25 meters, especially in areas where you're dealing with bats and the like, because of the necessity that they have to forage over wider areas. So I would like the planning committee to consider that buffer zone should be extended. But I take all of the points that you've raised about the guidance and what is coming out of central government.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Brodie.
Just following on from Councillor Stewart and raising the issue of there are more special ancient woodlands than others. I mean, how far are we going to start taking these things? We have a designation, we employ a tree officer who advises planning officers, and now we're questioning the professional expertise of the person that we employ, and we're trying. You may have a scientific background. I'm a simple man. Everybody knows that. You know, I see what's there, and there's a designation called ancient woodland. Now, Councillor Stewart tells me there's differentiation. Is that the case? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Mr. Chick, are you able to speak to that point? No, well, perhaps it is somewhat rhetorical, I think, isn't it? But yes, councillor Bacon.
I find myself agreeing with Jeff again. I mean, I don't feel in any way qualified to say it should be 5 metres, 3 metres, 10 metres, whatever. I know the tree officer that Mr. Chick has referred to, and yeah, he is an expert. And we have to accept the views of experts. My point I put earlier, which I think Mr. Bolter has dealt with, if we are assured that this I can't remember what it's called, the BMEP, the Biodiversity Enhancement Plan, if that is, we're assured that is going to take into account the environmental concerns that have been raised in this discussion, I think I would find myself content.
Thank you, councillor Bacon. Mr. Gard is going to take a conversation point to Mr. Bolter, so I'm going to pause for a moment before going to councillor Price. No, we're not in remission, so please.
Just wanted to make a comment. I have some further, I finished my questions, but I have some comments to make when we get to that part. But I'm just looking at the time. Do we think we're going to be finished by 7, or would you be looking to have a motion for extension?
I think we will need to seek a motion for extension, given the lateness of the
Because
hour.
of
in
this
which-
very important decision,
Splendid.
I will, put forward a motion for extension
Thanks
till
to
7:30.
councillor Jones Evans and councillor Andres.
Hopefully that members will be able to get this wrapped up by 7.
Yeah, so all in favour of extension? Yes. Okay, you carried.
Could I just ask, the buffer zone at the moment is,
Councillor Churchman, if we could pause for
Oh.
1 moment, we're just,
Oh, right,
the
okay.
legal advisor taking advice. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to steer us into comments, I think, because people can still ask questions when we're in comments anyway, can't they? Let's face it. I think I absolutely agree with Councillor Brodie on consistency, especially on the same night. I think the difference with this is that, we've got someone very knowledgeable that spoke about how he looks after his land, clearly who's taken a significant interest in it. And what grows on his land. So I think to consider something that I honed in on, which was the buffer zone, I think we've done that to death. We're not going to achieve anything on the buffer zone. But I think something that we could get from this is that the applicant, developer, and planning department could maybe have another conversation with the owner of Fatting Park Copse with regards to what species are used. Because clearly that is a concern to this gentleman. And it is a concern to me. I'm not a lover of just native species being planted everywhere, because often some of them are dominant invasive species that actually kill off the other native species that aren't so strong, that have been there for hundreds of years. So I think that is something we could definitely introduce into if we go to an approval on this. But a couple of other points I wanted to make was one about drainage. A drainage scheme for a site like this, we weren't asking for that on the other application. This site is clearly a bit different. The topography of this site is different, and drainage could be an issue. And I do respect drainage schemes. I've come to respect them over my time on this committee because you know, I've been here long enough to see drainage schemes put in place that I never thought would work, and they work. I don't have a huge amount of faith in a ditch filled with gravel compared to attenuation ponds, for instance. Attenuation ponds out of the question on this site. You know, that to me, people might have a different view on that, but they seem to offer less risk because just gravel in a ditch can bring other problems, of course. But I wanted to go on to just say that, you know, it'll come as no surprise that I support the idea of a solar park. Solar energy, from the discussion we had earlier, is a significant producer of electricity. And, you know, Councillor Redrup read a statement from a 17-year-old who got in touch with her, which just about says it all. You know, we shouldn't be, you know, just voicing our own opinions tonight. You know, I'm not the youngest person on this committee, but I have been in the past. You know, and I'm 52. So if I, you know, if I lived for another 35 years, you know, I'd like decisions that involve renewable energy that are made, perhaps while I'm on this council, to be producing energy for future generations. So I'm torn. It'd be very difficult not to support this application. But I think going back to discussions with the owner of Fatting Park Copse in regards to what planting he would feel is appropriate that won't damage his copse, it's a conversation and may even save the applicant money, perhaps, or developer money by not planting the wrong things. But also, is there any mileage in exploring attenuation ponds as opposed to attenuation ditches, let's say? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Price. Just to pick up on the first sort of part of your debate and questions, I think we need to remember that when we think about our conditions, what they are and how we apply them, they need to meet the nationally prescribed tests. And just should any member need a little memory jog on what those 6 tests are, they are very brief, so I will just read them out. And they are that they should be necessary, relevant to planning, relevant to the development to be permitted, enforceable, precise, and reasonable in all other respects. Now, whilst I understand where you're coming from with your suggestion, I think I would make the point to committee that it is very rare, and I can't think of any example when we've done this before, that when we have implemented and then discharged conditions, that we directly engage with the landowner, the adjoining landowner, on those matters. And to do that simply because they are the adjoining landowner in terms of a third party, my gut feel I would have concerns about that. Formalising that approach would mean that we may well fall foul of those tests. Now, again, what I would say, and there is I think, an informal element to this, which again is that the issues have been raised and those concerns have been given a lot of airtime, and rightly so, this evening. And again, with the agents in the room, I'm sure that there will be conversations that could be had that inform that formal process. But that formal process, for me, needs to remain between the LPA and the applicant should the application in front of us be approved.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. Councillor Quirk.
I was just balancing ponds and ditches.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Yes, so we're going to look at the balancing ponds issue. So, Mr. Chick, if you'd like to speak to that point.
Yes, so in terms of the ditch through the site, the planning authorities assess the capacity of that ditch using a formula called the Hazen-Williams formula. And so the capacity of the drainage is 23.6 million litres of water if full. If an extreme rainfall event of 10 millimetres per hour across the whole site, so 10 millimetres across the whole site, was to occur, that would result in generating 2.7 million litres of water. And this would mean that the pipe has the capability to hold enough water if it rained for 8.7 hours at 10 millimetres over each of those hours. So the drainage engineer has said, to illustrate this in simple terms, the pipe capacity is equal to 23.6 Olympic swimming pools, and therefore it has the hydrological capacity to manage surface water flows predicted across the site.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Supplementary from Councillor Price and Councillor Quirk. I'll come back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, and no disrespect was meant to the officers' reports. It's just, you know, to not ask these questions would not be right. And as I say, in my time on this committee, I have come to really trust and respect drainage schemes. You know, the calculations do appear to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Quirk, then Councillor Jones-Evans. Councillor Quirk.
Councillor Price just reminded me that when I took botany A level, he wasn't born. But we've got standards that are accepted nationally in terms of the buffer zones that the Environment Agency endorse that are expert. The suggestion is supported by our tree officer, and I suspect if you put a condition on that and turned it down based on that, you'll be in the realms of challenge, legal challenge, because of the unreasonableness of actually overruling national policy. We've talked a lot about this. I think it's about time that we actually put a motion, and if you'll allow it, I will actually put a motion that we accept the officer recommendation.
I am happy to allow the motion. I will go, however, to Councillor Jones-Evans, as she has been waiting for some time. It's been seconded by Councillor Brodie, so it is on the floor, but I believe I have the discretion to. Councillor
Yeah.
Jones-Evans.
Yeah, thank you. Just do my final comments now, if I may. Thank you, Councillor Bro, for picking up that issue with the previous application. I did check in the officers in the report and the comments from Forestry Commission. They did not ask for an extended buffer zone there. So that sort of put my mind at risk that we are actually looking at a completely different situation here. We have these broad, these designations, quite rightly so, SING, SSSI and ancient woodland and so on. But of course, each one of those is unique. And as we've heard from the owner of the COPs, and in fact, we say owner, but I would call him custodian, because actually it's going to be passed on to another person to look for and care after for them. So this is about the future as well, isn't it? It is about our future energy, but it's also about future generations and all these species that rely on us humans to actually kind of give them a break. You know, as Councillor Stewart said, the microbiology of a place as well, and the fungi, and it's such a unique ecosystem. So I'm comforted by Mr. Bolter's comments that they will look at this plan, and I'm asking for this to be a unique plan for a unique area. It can't just be something that's copy and pasted. There you go. There's a plan. We'll do that. We really have to respond, because when you hear this is unique on the island, it's got one species that only lives only exists in this COPS. And it may just be a tiny thing, but to me, it's actually a really big thing, because this is about our impact as human beings, and we need to be as informed as possible, and to you can mitigate as much as you can as well. But we just need to be really mindful of what damage we can do as human beings. So, yeah, if I can be comforted, but that this will be a unique plan, and you've listened to Mr. Davis, who is the custodian of this woodland, obviously a very informed and educated person as well. So I would just let that be heard, and let that be translated into a unique plan for this special place. But yeah, 100% on board with actually having the solar park, and we seem to have gone away from what the solar park is, and the benefits for the wider community and for the planet as well. So for that, but we just need to be mindful of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones-Evans. So we have a proposal to approve this application made by Councillor Quirk, seconded by Councillor Brodie. We'll go therefore directly to the vote. All those in favour of the motion. Thank you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Thank you. And as I'm not voting as chair on this matter, that is carried. Thank you. We go therefore to members' questions. Any questions? No pre-received questions. So in that case, I would draw the meeting to a conclusion. Thank you very much. Thank you to the public speakers. Thank you to those in the public gallery.